The 51st plenary meeting of the 10th emergency session of the General Assembly is called to order. The General Assembly will continue its consideration of Agenda Item 5, entitled Illegal Israeli Actions in Occupied East Jerusalem and the Rest of the Occupied Palestinian Territory. I now give the floor to the representative of Nicaragua.
Señor Presidente, Nicaragua se asocia a los discursos pronunciados por
Nicaragua
Uganda en
aligns
nombre del
itself with the
movimiento de
statements
países
made
no
by Uganda on
alineados
behalf
y de
of
Venezuela
NAM
en nombre
and
del
by
Grupo de
Venezuela
Amigos en
on behalf
defensa
of
de
the
la
Group of
Carta de las
Friends in
Naciones
defense of
Unidas.
the UN Charter.
Ante la continua política
Given the continued exceptionalist and obstructionist policy by the United States and the Security Council,
facilitando el genocidio y
furthering
los crímenes de
genocide
Israel en los
and
territorios
Israel's
palestinos y árabes
crimes in the
ocupados,
occupied
la comunidad
Palestinian and
internacional
Arab
y esta
territories,
Asamblea General
the international
nos vimos en la
community and this
necesidad y
General Assembly
responsabilidad
find
de tomar
ourselves duty-bound
acciones
to
y
take
soluciones
actions
en
and
derecho
find
y
solutions
justicia para
for
con el pueblo
justice and for
palestino.
the rights of the Palestinian
Por más de
people.
75
For more than
años, el pueblo
75 years,
palestino
the
ha sido sometido a
Palestinian people have been
agresiones inhumanas,
subjected to barbarous
graves crímenes de
aggressions,
guerra
to
y ahora,
serious war crimes,
por
and
más de
now,
200 días
for more than
consecutivos,
200 consecutive
a un
days,
genocidio sin
to an
precedentes que ha
unprecedented
dejado un saldo de
genocide,
más de
which has left a
35.000
toll of
palestinos
more than
muertos y
35,000
más de
Palestinians dead
78.000
and more
heridos.
than
Niños, niñas,
78,000 injured.
mujeres y hombres han
Children,
sido
women, and
asesinados en
men
sus casas,
have been killed in
en
their
las
homes,
calles,
in the
en sus
streets,
viajes huyendo del
as
norte
they
al sur,
flee from the north
en los
to the
refugios
south,
del UNRWA,
in UNRWA
en
refugee
hospitales,
camps, in
escuelas,
hospitals, in schools,
mezquitas e
in mosques,
iglesias.
and in churches.
Los recientes ataques en Rafah
As if there were not
demuestran
already
aún más,
sufficient evidence,
como si no
recent
tuviéramos ya
attacks in
suficiente
Rafah
evidencia,
are
que nos
further proof
encontramos ante el empeño
that we
de
are
hacer
witnessing
desaparecer
an
al pueblo
attempt to
palestino.
eradicate the Palestinian people.
El gobierno y pueblo de
The
Nicaragua
government and people
reitera
of
su firme
Nicaragua
solidaridad con el
reiterate
Estado de
our firm
Palestina
solidarity
y
with the
condena
state of Palestine,
enérgicamente estas
and we
atrocidades
energetically
cometidas contra
condemn
el
these
pueblo palestino en
atrocities
Gaza,
committed against the
Cisjordania,
Palestinian people in
Rafah y
Gaza,
en
the
todos sus
West Bank,
históricos y
Rafah, and
legítimos
throughout
territorios
their
ocupados,
historic and
infracciones por el
legitimate
gobierno de
territories
Israel,
occupied and divided by the
en
government of
violación
Israel,
de la Carta de
in
Naciones
violation
Unidas,
of the UN
del derecho
Charter, of
internacional,
international
del
law,
derecho
of
internacional
international
humanitario y la
humanitarian law,
Convención para
and of the
Prevención y la
Convention on
Sanción
the
del Delito de
Prevention and
Genocidio.
Punishment of the Crime of
Los
Genocide.
ataques y bombardeos a la
Attacks and
población
shellings
civil
of
deben
civilian
cesar de
populations
inmediato.
must cease
La entrega de
immediately.
ayuda
The
humanitaria a
delivery of
civiles es una
humanitarian aid to
necesidad
civilians is
impostergable.
an urgent, vital
Asimismo,
necessity.
debe detenerse el desplazamiento
The forced
forzado de la
displacement
población
of the
palestina.
Palestinian people must
Señor
also
Presidente,
end. Mr.
Hoy
President,
se hizo historia. La
today,
Asamblea General
history
empezó a
is being
escuchar el
made.
clamor
The
de los
General
pueblos del
Assembly has
mundo,
begun to hear the
apoyando
cry
a
of the peoples
Palestina
of the
y el
world in
rechazo a este
support of
genocidio
Palestine
que se
and
siente y
rejecting
se
this
escucha en las
genocide.
calles,
We can
en
hear
las
their voices
protestas,
in the
en los
streets,
estudiantes que
the
acampan.
protests
En
by
ellos está la
students
fuerza de
who have
lucha y
set
de
up
razón.
camps. The
Son
power
millones
of
y
reason
millones
is
de
on their
personas
side.
exigiendo
Millions
Palestina
and
libre.
millions of people are
El
demanding a
cese al
free
fuego,
Palestine,
el
a
respeto a la vida,
ceasefire, respect
al
for
fin de
life,
este
and
genocidio
an
y de
end
la
to
ocupación
this
israelita
genocide
de
and to
todos los
Israeli
territorios
occupation
ocupados.
of all occupied
La
territories.
mañana del viernes se dio
On
un paso
Friday
importante en la
morning, an
restitución de los
important step
derechos
was taken in
inalienables del
restoring
pueblo
the
palestino.
inalienable rights of the
Quedó más que
Palestinian people.
demostrado que es una
It became
ínfima
quite
minoría
clear
que
that a very
caprichosamente
small
continúa
minority
obstruyendo
arbitrarily
la
continued to
materialización del Estado
obstruct
de
the
Palestina.
creation of a Palestinian state.
El mundo quiere la paz
The
y una
world wants
Palestina libre.
peace and a free
El Consejo de
Palestine.
Seguridad
The Security
tiene que
Council
respetar
must
y asumir
respect
esta
and take
resolución
on
recién
board
aprobada.
this recently adopted
Debe
resolution.
reconsiderar la
It must
solicitud y
reconsider
aceptar a
the
Palestina
request
como
and
Estado
accept
libre e
Palestine as a
independiente.
free and independent state.
Estados Unidos no
The
puede
United
seguir
States
negando el
cannot
reconocimiento
continue
de un
to
Estado de
deny
Palestina en Naciones
recognition
Unidas.
of a Palestinian
Esto es
state in the United
justificable e
Nations. It is
improcedente.
unjustifiable and
La plena
inappropriate.
integración de Palestina en nuestra
The full
comunidad de
integration of
naciones es un acto
Palestine
de
into our
justicia
community of
y libertad
nations
vital
is a
para
vital
la
act of
materialización
justice and
de un Estado
freedom
de Palestina
for the
y
creation
la
of a
realización de los
Palestinian
derechos
state and the
inalienables del
achievement of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, their freedom, their self-determination, independence, and their right to live in peace within the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as capital. Mr. President,
cada vez somos más países que reconocemos al Estado de Palestina. Saludamos el reciente anuncio de Bahamas y Trinidad y Tobago, reconociendo oficialmente a Palestina como Estado. Ya somos 144 estados en estos últimos días. Nuestra América Latina y Caribeña, nuestra zona de paz,
our Latin American and Caribbean region, our zone of peace, has always stood firm against colonialism and in support of the self-determination of peoples. 32 of the 33 states in our region already recognize the state of Palestine, and we hope that very soon the one remaining state will announce its recognition of the state of Palestine. The United States and European countries have the moral and historical obligation to recognize and respect the free, independent, and sovereign state of Palestine. The governments and peoples of the region and the world must call for shared, safe coexistence for all, stability and peace with the Palestinian state as part of the United Nations. Listen to the voices of all of mankind who cry out for peace, justice, for a free Palestine, for an end to unjustified policies of denial and the exclusion of the inalienable rights of Palestinian people. Nicaragua will stand steadfast in support of Palestine, and together with the international community, we will continue with every effort and initiative necessary to move forward the question of Palestine until Palestine is free, free so that life can flourish, free so that peace can prevail. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Nicaragua. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malaysia.
Mr. President, my delegation thanks you for convening today's plenary meeting following the joint request by the Arab Group, Non-Aligned Movement, and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Malaysia aligns itself with the NAM and OIC statements and adds the following remarks in its national capacity. Mr. President, after more than 7 decades since the adoption of General Assembly Resolution 181 in 1947, which partitioned Palestinians' land into Arab and Jewish states, Palestinians continue to be denied their right to statehood. In contrast, Israel was accepted as a full member in 1949. Since then, the world has been witnessing turmoil and bloodshed in the land of Palestine. For 7 decades, Israel's illegal, brutal, and inhumane occupation has dispossessed Palestinians of their lands, properties, rights, and dignity. It has taken the lives of countless numbers of innocent men, women, and children, and continue to do so to this day. The current hostilities in Gaza are the latest episode in the already long history of Palestinian struggle under Israeli occupation. After about 7 months of relentless Israeli military onslaught, more than 35,000 deaths have been recorded, about 70% of whom are women and children. That is nearly 15,000 children and 10,000 women killed. The discoveries of mass graves in the compounds of Al-Shifa and Nasser hospitals are deeply concerning. The numbers of deaths among humanitarian workers and media personnel have also reached new records. The level of destruction of civilian infrastructure, including schools, hospitals, and UN premises, is unprecedented. The unrelenting destruction of Gaza and catastrophic humanitarian condition of its inhabitants are downright appalling. And despite warnings of disastrous humanitarian consequences, Israel remains adamant to mount a ground military assault of Rafah. The carnage in Gaza must stop. The international community must demand proper accountability processes, starting with thorough, transparent, and independent international investigations on all breaches of international law, including possible acts of war crime and genocide in Gaza. Mr. President, the question of Palestine must be resolved once and for all. Israel's occupation must end. Justice must be restored. The self-determination of the Palestinian people must be upheld. The fully sovereign state of Palestine must be recognized. For those of us who still remember the misery of life under occupation or colonization and the bitter struggle of our forefathers for independence and statehood, it is our responsibility to support Palestinian statehood. It is our collective moral duty to do everything we can to ensure that the state of Palestine take its rightful place as our equal in this august chamber. The fundamental United Nations founding principle of equality among nations must be extended to the state of Palestine without any discrimination nor further delay. Malaysia's support towards Palestinian statehood and its membership to the United Nations is long-standing. We hold the view that the admission of the State of Palestine as a full member should have happened when General Assembly Resolution 181 was adopted and Israel was admitted 75 years ago. The resolution adopted by the Assembly last Friday is a significant step forward. It is a much-needed positive development in the face of the Security Council's continued politicization and paralysis. The adoption of the text by an overwhelming majority is a clear testament of the enormous support for the Palestinian statehood within the international community. Malaysia shares the view that the State of Palestine meets the 4 criteria for statehood outlined in the 1933 Montevideo Convention. We also firmly believe that the State of Palestine fulfills the conditions for membership to the United Nations as laid out in Article 4 of the Charter. Palestine has consistently demonstrated that it is committed to peace, even as Israel persists with its brutal and oppressive occupation, continues to erode its territorial integrity, and attempts to annihilate the Palestinian people. It is also clear to us that Palestine highly values the opportunities to participate in UN processes, and it is able and willing to carry out obligations enshrined in the Charter. Palestine has beyond doubt proven itself worthy of membership of this organization. In contrast, Israel continues to breach international law, defy UN resolutions, as well as vilify and malign the United Nations and its officials. Israel's actions, which each passing day inevitably raise our doubts if it actually believes in the UN system and values its membership in this organization. The offensive gimmick of shredding the UN Charter we witnessed in this chamber last Friday is just another example of Israel's utter disrespect of the United Nations. Ironically, it is Israel's credibility that is being shredded to pieces through their contempt for international law and norms. No cheap theatrics will ever deny the resounding support for the resolution, as well as the enduring relevance of the Charter's principles and aspirations. Mr. President, assertions that the State of Palestine does not meet the criteria for membership set forth in Article 4 of the UN Charter are absurd and quite suspicious. Such allegations are blatant rejection of General Assembly and Security Council resolutions that have recognized Palestine as a state. To date, 144 members of the United Nations have recognized the State of Palestine, and several countries have announced their intention of recognizing Palestine in the very near future. We encourage those who have not officially recognized Palestine to do so without further delay. Mr. President, the question of Palestine has remained an outstanding issue in this organization for more than 7 decades. It is high time that the UN deliver on its duty and responsibility and produce a just, lasting, and peaceful solution to the question of Palestine. This should start with the recognition of the State of Palestine, based on the pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, in accordance with the internationally recognized two-state solution. We, the independent and sovereign member states of the United Nations, must not renege on our commitment to uphold the United Nations principle of equality among nations. We must not fail our Palestinian brothers and sisters in their struggle for self-determination. We must not forget, most of us here were once in their shoes. Palestinians too deserve to live in peace, to develop, and to prosper. We shall not and must not succumb to the pressure of those who seek to undermine peace in the Middle East. We call on all member states to be united and support efforts towards lasting peace in the Middle East. The full membership of the State of Palestine of the United Nations is a critical step towards this end. Malaysia stands ready to be part of and support initiatives aimed at realizing the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to freedom and self-determination. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malaysia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bahrain.
Mr. President, allow me to thank you for resuming the 10th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly. My delegation aligns itself with the statement delivered by the UAE on behalf of the Arab Group, Mauritania on behalf of the OIC, and Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. Mr. President, we welcome the adoption by the General Assembly last Friday of Resolution A/ES-ES-10/23, with 143 states voting favorably on the eligibility of the Palestinian state to be granted full membership at the United Nations, and on recommending that the Security Council reconsider the matter favorably and grant Palestine additional privileges and rights regarding its participation in this international organization. We stress the need for diplomatic and humanitarian efforts to support the legitimate historic rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination, freedom, justice, equality, independence, and ending the occupation in line with international law. We reaffirm that the full international acknowledgement of the full international recognition of the Palestinian state and its membership at the United Nations is a political and legal right. It is inalienable and a legitimate historic right of the Palestinian people to establish their independent state on the borders of 1967, with East Jerusalem as a capital, based on the two-state solution, in line with the resolutions of international legitimacy, the Arab Peace Initiative, and this is a major step to promote just, sustainable, and comprehensive peace in the Middle East. Mr. President, we condemn the Israeli military operations on Rafah, the last safe haven for more than 1 million Palestinian people. We condemned its control over the Rafah land crossing in southern Gaza. We warned against the dangerous repercussions of that on innocent civilians. We once again call upon the international community and influential parties at the Security Council to immediately and urgently interfere to ensure a humanitarian truce and to stop any military expansion to protect peace and security regionally. In conclusion, it is important to continue supporting the Palestinian people so that they can be granted their legitimate national rights. It is important to support every effort to ensure a ceasefire in Gaza, the delivery of humanitarian assistance to civilians, and launching a serious and genuine political process to ensure sustainable and comprehensive peace in the region in order to establish an independent Palestinian state on the borders of 1967 with East Jerusalem as a capital on the basis of the two-state solution and based on the resolutions of international legitimacy, the Arab Peace Initiative, and granting Palestine full membership at the United Nations. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Bahrain. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Mr. President, thank you for resuming the 10th Emergency Special Session at the request of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Arab League, and non-allied movement groups. This august body, the General Assembly, as the most representative organ of the United Nations, has expressed the collective stance of the international community by adopting the resolution on Palestine's admission as a member to the United Nations with 143 positive votes. Turkey is proud to have co-sponsored this historic resolution. The adoption of this resolution not only marks a significant milestone in Palestine's pursuit of statehood, but also highlights the growing disparity between the Security Council and the collective voice of the international community. Mr. President, 7 months into the conflict, the dire situation in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank persists. The Palestinian people are brutally targeted with total disregard of the international law and international humanitarian law. The recent escalations, the recent attacks in Rafah, as well as the wider region, are deeply worrying. The discovery of mass graves in Gaza underscores the severity of the situation. People in Gaza are facing catastrophic levels of hunger. UNRWA, the backbone of the humanitarian operations in Gaza, is under political and physical attack. Disrupting UNRWA's work would not only exacerbate the suffering, but also destabilize the entire region. Despite this unprecedented humanitarian tragedy, the inability to halt bloodshed and man-made famine in Gaza is deplorable and shameful. Mr. President, since the conflict's onset, the international community's demands have been clear: an immediate ceasefire, unimpeded humanitarian aid, and end to forced displacement. 2 resolutions adopted by this august body, as well as the Security Council Resolution 2728, calling for a ceasefire, have not been implemented yet. The provisional measures by the International Court of Justice, Security Council resolutions on humanitarian aid, and fundamental principles of international law are disregarded. The gravest violations of the UN Charter is taking place before our own eyes in Gaza. This has been coupled with the attempts to insult the UN and its charter under this roof. It is our duty as the international community to make sure that this lawlessness and impunity comes to an end. We call on the Security Council to take swift action, starting with an immediate ceasefire. The brutality and the bloodshed in Gaza have persisted for too long. This must end now, and its recurrence must be prevented through a durable 2-state solution. A 2-state solution offers the sole prospect of breaking the cycle of violence. Mr. President, Turkey supports the application of Palestine for its admission as a full member of the United Nations. This step will enable Palestinians to achieve their aspirations for statehood, sovereignty, and independence, fostering momentum for a two-state solution, which is the only way to serve through justice. Palestine deserves to be a full member and to be treated as an equal member of the international community. Security Council resolutions envision a region where two states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side within secure and recognized borders. The longer this vision is deferred, the longer the region will be pushed into vicious circles of violence and destruction. With the adoption of this resolution, the wider membership has determined that the State of Palestine is qualified for membership in the United Nations and recommended that the Security Council reconsider the matter favorably. The overwhelming majority in the Security Council is already in favor. We urge the Security Council to take concrete steps toward realizing a political solution based on the two-state vision and pre-67 borders, with East Jerusalem as the capital of an independent, sovereign, and contiguous state of Palestine. In conclusion, I welcome the Palestinian delegation to participate in the works of this assembly. Thank you, Mr. President, and all delegations voted for this resolution.
I thank the distinguished representative of Turkey. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon.
السيد الرئيس
Mr. President,
أتوجه إليكم بالشكر على
I thank you
عقد
for
هذه
convening
الجلسة.
this session.
يؤيد لبنان
Lebanon
البيان
aligns
الذي
itself
أدلى
with the
به
statement
وفد
delivered
الإمارات
by
العربية
the United Arab
المتحدة
Emirates
نيابة
on
عن
behalf
المجموعة
of the
العربية.
Arab group.
السيد الرئيس
Mr. President,
يرحب لبنان
Lebanon
بتبني
welcomes
الجمعية
the
العامة
General Assembly
للقرار
adoption
المتعلق
of
بقبول أعضاء جدد
resolution
في
on
الأمم
admission of
المتحدة.
new members to the UN.
لقد أنصفت
Through this
الجمعية العامة
long-awaited
فلسطين
resolution, the General
وإن طال
Assembly has done
الانتظار
right by
بالإقرار
Palestine by
بحقها
recognizing
بأخذ
its
مكانها
right to
الطبيعي
take
بين
its
الأمم
rightful place among nations,
وحسمت
and
النقاش
concluded
حول
that the
أهليتها
discussion regarding
لعضوية
its
الأمم المتحدة
eligibility for UN
وفقا
membership
للمادة
in
الرابعة
accordance
من
with
ميثاق
Article
الأمم
4
المتحدة.
of the UN Charter.
يبقى أن
It is
ينصت
up
مجلس
now
الأمن
for
إلى
the
هذا
Security
القرار
Council to
الواضح
listen to this
والجلي
clear resolution
الصادر عن
by
الجمعية
the
العامة
General Assembly
وأن يعيد
and to
النظر في طلب
reconsider
عضوية فلسطين
Palestine's application
بشكل إيجابي ودون
positively
تأخير.
and without delay.
ف75 عاما من
75
الانتظار
years
كافية.
is a long time.
السيد الرئيس
Mr. President,
ينص القرار على
the
تعزيز
resolution
مشاركة
calls for
دولة
strengthening
فلسطين
Palestine's
في دورات
participation
وأعمال
in
الجمعية
sessions and
العامة
works of the General
والمؤتمرات
Assembly,
الدولية
international
التي
conferences
تعقد
that
تحت
are
رعاية
convened
الجمعية أو
under the
الأجهزة
auspices
الأخرى
of the General
التابعة
Assembly
للأمم
or other
المتحدة.
organs of the UN.
ونرى في ذلك
We see
تأكيدا من
in
الجمعية
this a
العامة
reiteration
على
by the
قدرة
General Assembly
فلسطين
that Palestine
على
is
التفاعل
capable
الإيجابي
to
في
engage
الأمم
positively
المتحدة
within
ومع
the
الدول
UN and
الأعضاء
with the member states
في إطار تعزيز مقاصد
the
وغايات الأمم المتحدة
process of
ومنها التسامح
strengthening the
والعيش
principles
في
and goals of
سلام
the
وحسن
UN,
الجوار
including tolerance,
وضم
living in
إرادتها
peace
إلى
and good
إرادة
neighborly
المجتمع الدولي
relations, and
لحفظ
join its
السلم
will
والأمن
with the
الدوليين.
international community to
السيد الرئيس
maintain international peace and
يكرر
security.
التعبير
We
عن
reiterate
الأسف
our deep
الشديد
regret for the
لعدم تمكن
inability of the
المجلس
Council
في
on the
18 من
18th
نيسان
of
الماضي
April
من تمرير
to
مشروع
adopt a
القرار
draft
المقدم من
resolution
الجزائر
tabled by Algeria
والذي يوصي
recommending the
بمنح
granting
فلسطين عضوية
of full
كاملة في
membership
هذه
to
المنظمة
Palestine.
ونحثه
We
على
urge the
مراجعة
Council
موقفه
to
بأسرع
reconsider
وقت
its position as
ونرى
soon as
أن فشل
possible. We
المجلس
see
في تمرير مشروع
that this
القرار
failure
يساهم
would
بإطالة
only
أمد
further
الصراع
prolong
أكثر.
this conflict.
ولا بد
We
أن نحيي
salute
الدول
all
التي
states
اعترفت
who
مؤخرا
recently have
بفلسطين
recognized Palestine,
والذين انضموا إلى
joining more
أكثر
than
من 140 دولة
140
سبق أن اعترفت بها، ونحث المزيد من الدول على الإقدام على هذه الخطوة النبيلة والمبدئية، والتي لا شك أنها تدعم جهود تحقيق السلام والتوصل لحل الدولتين. فقيام الدولة الفلسطينية هو مفتاح الحل لكل أزمات المنطقة، وهو الطريق إلى الاستقرار تمهيدا للوصول إلى الأمن والأمان لجميع شعوب المنطقة. السيد الرئيس، 7 أشهر طويلة وأليمة ودموية مرت على أهل غزة وجنوب لبنان. لذا نطالب بوقف فوري ومستدام لإطلاق النار دون تأخير، تجنبا لخروج الأمور عن السيطرة وتوسع رقعة الحرب الإقليمية، وصونا لدماء المدنيين الذين يقتلون يوميا. ونكرر المطالبة بالالتزام بالقرارات الصادرة عن الجمعية العامة وعن مجلس الأمن المطالبة بوقف لإطلاق النار، وآخرها القرار 2728، وتركيز الجهود على إنجاح الوساطة التي بادرت بها قطر ومصر والتي قبلتها حماس، ونطالب بالضغط على إسرائيل للقبول أيضا بهذه الوساطة دون تأخير وعدم اجتياح رفح. السيد الرئيس، لبنان يؤكد مرة جديدة التزامه الكامل بالقرار 1701، وهو يبذل كل الجهود السياسية والدبلوماسية لتطبيقه وعودة الاستقرار والهدوء لحدوده الجنوبية، تمهيدا لعودة الأهالي إلى قراهم وبيوتهم. كما نرحب بجهود الدول الصديقة وعلى رأسهم الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وفرنسا لما يقومان به من جهود من أجل عدم توسيع الحرب والمساعدة بإيجاد حل سلمي. السيد الرئيس، نطالب مجددا بالعمل بشكل جدي على إعادة إحياء الأفق السياسي لحل الدولتين وإنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي والاعتراف بالدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة على حدود 4 من حزيران لعام 1967، عاصمتها القدس الشرقية وفق مرجعيات الحل، وإيجاد حل عادل لقضية اللاجئين وقضايا الحل النهائي وفق قرارات الشرعية الدولية، ومبادرة السلام العربية في بيروت لعام 2002، وانسحاب إسرائيل من الأراضي العربية المحتلة. وشكرا السيد الرئيس.
I thank the distinguished representative of Lebanon. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since its establishment, the United Nations have served as a platform for dialogue. On many of the issues we address, the UN member states do not agree. We have a diversity of opinions, backgrounds, and positions, but this diversity can only be bridged through the dialogue. In our view, the self-determination of peoples is one of the cornerstones for achieving a strong multilateral system. The Slovenian people were able to exercise this right in order to freely establish their own sovereign and independent states. Moreover, for Slovenia, becoming a member of the UN signified a major accomplishment in our diplomatic efforts following our declaration of independence. With these memories still fresh, we understand and empathize with Palestine's aspiration to attain the same goal. Mr. President, only through a two-state solution where two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side, will bring the long-lasting peace to the region. In a given situation, we firmly believe in two-layered approach. We must most urgently address the current catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, and we need to resume the political process towards a two-state solution. In the Security Council, Slovenia voted in favor of the recommendation for membership of the State of Palestine in the UN and clearly explained its vote. We trust this could significantly support the peace process, which should address all outstanding issues, support the State of Palestine, and guarantee security of Israel. The United Nations has had an important role on the question of Palestine for decades. We are of the view that UN should play a crucial role in the peace processes, and therefore both states should have an equal status in the organization. Each journey is a sequence of steps. Granting membership in the UN to Palestine could be one of these important steps towards peace. Slovenia therefore supports that Security Council continues to deliberate on this question, whereas also underlines that the road to admission of Palestine as a full member of the UN must continue fully in line with the UN Charter. As this process is taking place, Slovenia supports the enhancement of the rights of Palestine in the UN. Amidst the diversity of views at the UN, we always place the UN Charter at the center of our discussions. In that sense, we welcome that the main sponsors of the resolution we adopted on Friday have made necessary and important changes to address concerns of several member states during negotiations. But Slovenia looks forward to the moment when the UN General Assembly will welcome Palestine as a full member of the UN. We appreciate the legal clarity provided on this distinction of rights. Mr. President, dialogue must prevail over weapons in Gaza. Choosing a peaceful way is not always easy, and we welcome the State of Palestine choosing peace through this resolution. Here at the UN, we recognize their daily choice of peace through meetings, resolutions, different means of settlement of disputes under Article 33, and a commitment to engagement. Our vote was therefore a clear signal of support to the continuously choosing the dialogue. I thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Slovenia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.
Mr. President, my delegation aligns itself with the statement delivered by Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. I wish to make the following observations, however, in my national capacity. Excellencies, distinguished representatives, it has been said that in the heart of adversity, hope emerges as the strongest force for change. And from the seeds of hope, the tree of peace shall grow, sheltering both nations. We must, therefore, my dear friends, generously nourish that growth. That is my delegation's sincere hope. Sri Lanka supported the call for the admission of the State of Palestine as a member of this assembly in an enhanced status. We have consistently maintained that position, that a just and lasting solution can only be achieved based on a two-state solution, on the basis of the borders of the 4th of June, 1967. Mr. President, a peaceful and stable Middle East fundamentally depends on whether a two-state solution becomes a reality or not. It is sometimes difficult to find an intelligible rationale to the paradox as to how, while ostensibly supporting a two-state solution, the various state members oppose the admission of the State of Palestine as a regular member of the United Nations. Mr. President, the developments since 7th of October last year have called into question our fundamental humanity as the continued massacre of civilians takes place, with live reports reaching our homes, our workplaces on a daily basis. Mr. President, in your address to the General Assembly on the 8th of April, you very rightly termed the conflict in Gaza as a blight on our common humanity, which is, in the words of the UN Emergency Relief Coordinator Martin Griffiths, he described it as unparalleled in its intensity, brutality, and scope. Mr. President, there are several reasons that can be urged in this August Assembly to support this resolution, which we have done, that we have endorsed in its present form, which would give Palestine an enhanced status and recognition that would necessarily require the stakeholders to give Palestine their long-eluded standing in the international community. What is it that Palestine can enjoy more than what they enjoy now? My dear friends, it can enjoy enhanced UN membership, which will allow Palestine to actively participate in global efforts to maintain peace and security. It will ensure sovereignty and equality. You will appreciate that enhanced UN membership ensures that a country is recognized as a member state with recognized rights and responsibilities. It provides access to various resources and assistance programs offered by this organization. It strengthens international relations. Think about it. Being a member of the UN enhances its credibility and legitimacy in the international community. It facilitates enhanced diplomatic relations and opens doors for bilateral and multilateral cooperation, trade, and investment. It helps address global challenges. Enhanced membership will enable Palestine to actively participate in addressing global challenges collectively, such as climate change, poverty, terrorism, human rights violations, and public health crises. It will provide a platform to collaborate with other countries and work towards finding collective solutions. And finally, it will place a demand on Palestine itself to uphold international law and human rights. Enhanced membership signifies, therefore, a commitment, I say, to upholding international law, human rights, and fundamental freedoms, and would allow Palestine to engage in discussions, negotiations, and initiatives at promoting and protecting human rights globally. Mr. President, the time, I say, is therefore ripe for this Assembly that has proclaimed with a resounding majority its desire and will that Palestine be granted the status of an enhanced UN membership as envisaged in the resolution that we have now put in place. This Assembly has proclaimed its intentions in the clearest of terms, with an overwhelming decision affirming its will to grant the state of Palestine the right of enhanced membership. Mr. President, we cannot tarry over the right of the Palestinian people to participate in the work of this organization on an equal basis with other member states any longer. Mr. President, to remain in the current state of inertia will surely undermine, I say, and put at stake the moral and ethical foundation of the international system based on the UN Charter and the rule of law. It has been accepted that the state of Palestine has fulfilled the requirements in terms of Article 4. It has accepted the UN Charter as a peace-loving state. It is a member of the non-aligned movement, a member of the G77 in China, a member of the Asia-Pacific group of states, as well as other groupings. The delegation of Palestine, Excellencies, participates in the proceedings of this organization day in and day out in the ordinary course of its work. It is not right, we believe, that a single country or a minority group can stand in the way of an overwhelming majority of the international community. So let us today give the people of Palestine the dignity they deserve, and at the same time give humanity the hope that something is right in this world. It is time to act now. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Costa Rica.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President,
La cuestión de Palestina se encuentra en
the
la agenda de la
Palestinian
organización
question has
desde
remained on the organization's agenda
1947.
since 1947.
Esta asamblea le concedió el estatus de observador no miembro de las
This
Naciones
General
Unidas
Assembly
en
granted
el
Palestine
2011,
non-member observer
luego de que
status in the
su
United
solicitud de
Nations in
ingreso como
2011,
miembro pleno
following
fue rechazada por
the
el
Security
Consejo de
Council's
Seguridad.
rejection of its application for full
13
membership.
años más tarde
13
se
years
revive
later,
la solicitud de Palestina.
Palestine's
Costa Rica
application has been
reconoció al Estado de
revitalized.
Palestina en el 2007
In
y votó a favor de
2007,
dicha
Costa Rica
resolución.
recognized the state of Palestine and
Nuestro
voted in
país,
favor of
que
such a
reconoció al
resolution.
Estado de
Our
Israel
country, which recognized
inmediatamente
the state of
después de su
Israel
proclamación
immediately
en
after its proclamation in
1948,
1948,
estableciendo relaciones
established
diplomáticas en
diplomatic relations in
1954,
1954,
también votó a favor
also
del
voted in
ingreso de
favor of
Israel como
Israel's
miembro pleno
admission
de esta
as a full
organización
member of this
el 11 de
organization
mayo de
on May 11,
1949.
1949.
Desde 1945,
Since 1945, 142 states have joined the United Nations.
Todos ellos han solicitado unirse a esta organización que
All of them
clama en su carta
sought to apply
constitutiva
because
que
the
en ella
UN
se
is an
encuentran
organization that pledges
representados
under
we,
its
the
charter
peoples,
to represent
nosotros los pueblos.
we, the peoples.
En este momento,
At this moment,
144
144
estados
countries
Palestina
recognize
como Estado.
Palestine as a state.
La mayoría de dichos países,
The majority of these
incluso
countries,
muchos que
including
aún no lo han
many who have
reconocido,
not yet done so
clamamos por
formally,
una resolución
call for a
pacífica
peaceful
del conflicto
resolution of the
palestino-israelí
Israeli-Palestinian conflict through the implementation of the two-state solution pursuant to Resolution 242 of 1967.
La solución de los dos estados es la
The
opción
two-state
para
solution
responder a las necesidades de
is the
seguridad
option
a
which
largo
meets the
plazo
long-term
de
security
ambos
needs of
países
both
y a
countries
las legítimas
and the legitimate
aspiraciones de ambos
aspirations of their
pueblos
peoples
de vivir en paz,
to live in peace,
prosperidad y con
prosperity, and
seguridad.
with dignity and
No es
security.
congruente
It is
abogar por la
inconsistent
solución de
to
dos
advocate for
estados,
the two-state
pero negar el
solution, yet
reconocimiento como
deny
estado de pleno
full state
de uno de
recognition
ellos
to one of them.
solo en situaciones de igualdad de
Only in
derechos
situations of
e
equal
igualdad
rights
de
and equal
reconocimiento a
recognition
sus
of
legítimas
their legitimate
aspiraciones
aspirations
podremos
can
avanzar
we
en una
advance
solución
a
justa y
just and
equitativa
equitable
para
solution
ambos países
for both
y
countries
principalmente
and
para
primarily
ambos
for both
pueblos.
peoples.
Ambos deben poder ver
Both
cumplido
must be
su
able to
derecho a
fulfill their right to
autogobernarse y a
self-govern
ser
and to be
reconocidos.
recognized.
Costa Rica votó a favor
Costa
de esta
Rica voted in
resolución
favor
para
of this
sumar su
resolution
voz a este urgente llamado.
To articulate the
Confiamos
urgency of
en,
this call,
en que el
we
Consejo de
trust
Seguridad
that the Security
hará lo
Council
correcto.
will do the right
Es
thing.
hora de acoger en el seno de esta organización al
Within this
Estado
organization,
número 194.
it is time
El
to
Estado de
welcome the
Palestina, en
194th state,
concordancia
the
con
state
nuestros
of
principios
Palestine, in
fundacionales.
accordance with our
Si
founding
logramos
principles.
contar con ambos
If we manage
estados
to have
con
both
el
states
mismo reconocimiento
with the
internacional
same
en esta
international
organización,
recognition in this
estaremos más
organization,
cerca de una
we will be
verdadera
closer
posibilidad de paz,
to a real
seguridad
possibility
y
of
reconciliación
peace,
para
security, and
Medio Oriente
reconciliation for the
y de
Middle
mayor
East
esperanza
and
para
greater
el mundo
hope
entero.
for the entire
Muchas
world.
gracias.
Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Costa Rica. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Norway.
President, Norway strongly supports the Palestinian people's rights and aspirations of statehood in accordance with international law. Palestinian statehood is a condition for the realization of the two-state solution in line with the UN Partition Plan of 1947. It is Norway's long-held conviction that a Palestinian state must comprise the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and Gaza, and be based on the 1967 borders. Norway has been clear that we are ready to support an application for full membership of the United Nations for Palestine when the issue is brought before the General Assembly. We believe that such a membership would increase the possibility to achieve a political settlement beneficial for both Israelis and Palestinians. We underline that the formal procedure of admission to full membership in the United Nations, according to the UN Charter, will be affected by a decision of the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the Security Council. By co-sponsoring and voting yes to the resolution on membership of the State of Palestine, we have reaffirmed our full support for a just, lasting and comprehensive peace in the Middle East, and underscored the importance of a much-needed settlement to this conflict. We recall the commitments made by the State of Palestine in this regard, including in its application for UN membership. Although our affirmative vote in favor of the resolution does not prejudge our bilateral recognition of Palestine, an issue which we are actively considering, it is testimony to Norway's strong and unequivocal commitment to the two-state solution. This entails a sovereign, democratic, contiguous and viable Palestinian state living side by side with the State of Israel in peace within secure and recognized borders. President, after more than 7 months of war, all eyes are now on Rafah. Norway remains deeply concerned about the recent escalation of hostilities in Rafah, which suggests a larger military operation may be imminent. We call on Israeli authorities to halt the operation. The more than 1 million who have sought refuge in Rafah have already fled multiple times from famine, death, and horror. They are now being told to move again, but no place in Gaza is safe. We stress the urgent need to ensure safe, rapid, unimpeded, and sustained humanitarian access to all the people in need in all of Gaza, and that all available crossings into Gaza remain open so that essential supplies, including aid and fuel, can enter Gaza. We mourn with the Palestinians that have fallen victim to this war and their families that desperate are searching for safety and an end to this war. We mourn with the Israeli victims, hostages, and their families. This war has to stop. There is a desperate need for a ceasefire and the immediate release of all remaining hostages. And we must embark on a path to a political solution. President, only a negotiated solution between the parties can bring lasting peace and security for both Palestinian and Israelis, as well as the wider region. We appeal to both sides to build on Friday's decision in a constructive manner and urgently resume comprehensive and good faith negotiations. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Norway. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Chile.
Presidente, agradecemos esta convocatoria al 10º periodo extraordinario de sesiones de emergencia de la Asamblea General para discutir un proyecto de resolución presentado por Emiratos Árabes Unidos en nombre del Grupo Árabe que determina que el Estado de Palestina cumple los requisitos para ser miembro de las Naciones Unidas de acuerdo con el artículo 4 de la Carta y por lo tanto debe ser admitido como miembro de las Naciones Unidas. Chile suscribe la intervención realizada por Uganda en nombre del movimiento de los países no alineados. Asimismo, Chile reafirma su apoyo al Estado de Palestina para que sea admitido como miembro de pleno derecho de las Naciones Unidas. Por esta razón, copatrocinamos el citado proyecto de resolución. Desde el 7 de octubre, la mayoría de los miembros de esta organización y también autoridades de la misma han reiterado que no lograr avances hacia una solución de dos estados solo aumenta la volatilidad y el riesgo para millones de personas en toda la región que siguen viviendo bajo la amenaza constante They continue to live under the constant threat of violence, and therefore the admission of the State of Palestine to the United Nations must be addressed urgently.
Señor Presidente, deseamos expresar una vez más las condolencias de Chile a las familias y seres queridos de las víctimas que han muerto en el conflicto que azota a la Franja de Gaza. Somos especialmente sensibles por las mujeres y los niños inocentes que han padecido en esta catástrofe. Subrayamos que la violencia no se soluciona con más violencia. Extendemos nuestra profunda solidaridad con los heridos. Reiteramos el completo apoyo al dedicado y valiente trabajo que están realizando las Naciones Unidas, sus agencias y particularmente la UNRWA en terreno. Con mucho pesar sentimos la muerte de los funcionarios de esta agencia humanitaria en esta guerra. En tal sentido, reprobamos el ataque ocurrido contra la sede de esta agencia el jueves de la semana pasada en Jerusalén Este. Insistimos que la protección a la vida humana debe ser nuestra máxima prioridad y la protección a los civiles es una obligación fundamental. Por esto se debe respetar la Carta de la ONU, el derecho internacional y el derecho internacional humanitario. Indudablemente, este respeto ha sido infringido por los actos terroristas perpetrados por Hamas el 7 de octubre pasado y la respuesta indiscriminada del Estado de Israel sobre la población que habita en la Franja de Gaza y que también ha afectado a Cisjordania. Chile ha condenado sin matices las acciones de Hamas, al igual que todo acto terrorista, hechos de violencia y hostilidades contra la población civil. Asimismo, exigimos la liberación inmediata y sin condiciones
and unconditional release of all hostages still in the hands of Hamas, who must guarantee their well-being and proper treatment in accordance with international law. We are concerned at the siege imposed by Israel on Gaza because it has meant that the people there are left without basic needs, including food, water, medicine, fuel. This has led to widespread hunger and disease. We condemn Israel's military offensive against the city of Rafah. The consequences of this military operation can be devastating in many ways and will only delay the achievement of peace. We join in concerns expressed by previous speakers about the discovery of mass graves in the hospitals of Nasser and Al-Shifa and in the neighboring areas in Gaza, where several hundred bodies were found buried, including bodies of women, children, and older persons. We are grateful to the 15 members of the Security Council who were able to arrive at a consensus on Friday the 10th through a press statement. Chile insists on an immediate and permanent ceasefire with a greater influx of humanitarian assistance to Gaza, guaranteeing the full, immediate, safe, unfettered and sustained access for humanitarian aid. In other words, all obstacles to that assistance must be eliminated and the use of all available land routes for entry into Gaza must be facilitated. We have seen that the repercussions and ramifications of this conflict in the remainder of the region are of great concern as the violence continues. All of these acts have been condemned by the majority of the international community. We therefore echo the appeal by the Secretary General and the appeals by the heads of various UN agencies to reduce tensions. We encourage the efforts of the Humanitarian Reconstruction Coordinator in Gaza, Ms. Sigrid Kaag, and in her work, and we hope that she will be granted every facility and support as she carries out her tasks. We encourage all parties involved, and as well as the international community, to continue to work to end this war. This is only possible through diplomatic means and dialogue. We recognize the efforts and the results which friendly countries have achieved to reduce tensions. We underscore the 3 resolutions adopted by the Security Council in an effort to achieve
ignorarlo o brindar facilidades a la ayuda humanitaria.
and to
La
provide
2712 y la
humanitarian aid. I'm
2720,
referring to
adoptadas
resolutions
el año pasado, y
2712 and
especialmente la
2720 adopted
2728 del
last year,
25 de
and in
marzo.
particular,
Recordamos que
Resolution
todas las resoluciones de
2728
este órgano
adopted
son
on March
vinculantes y
25th.
deben ser
We recall that all
acatadas y
these
respetadas.
resolutions of the Council are
Señor
binding
Presidente,
and
Chile
must be
promueve la
complied with
solución de
and
los dos
respected.
estados
Mr.
y el
President,
derecho de
Chile
Israel y
promotes the
Palestina a
two-state
vivir en
solution and the right
armonía
of Israel and
dentro de fronteras
Palestine to live in
internacionales
harmony
seguras
within
y reconocidas
internationally
y con total
recognized and
respeto a los
safe
derechos
borders
humanos
with full
de
respect
todos sus
for the human
habitantes.
rights of all the
Hacemos un llamado
inhabitants.
urgente para
We
dar
make an
cabal y
urgent
pronto
appeal
cumplimiento
for
a las resoluciones
full, immediate
pertinentes que
compliance with
respaldan
the
el
relevant
derecho del pueblo
resolutions
palestino
supporting the
a
right of the
constituir un Estado
Palestinian
soberano,
people to
como
build
son
a
las
sovereign
resoluciones
state
181 y
that is reflected
242
in
de esta
GA
Asamblea
Resolutions
General, y
181
también
and
aquellas relacionadas
242
como la
and
Resolución
related resolutions
2334
such as
del Consejo de
Security
Seguridad,
Council Resolution
donde se reafirma que el
2334,
establecimiento de
which
asentamientos
reaffirms
por
that the
parte de
establishment
Israel
of
en el
settlements by
territorio palestino
Israel
ocupado,
in the occupied
incluida
Palestinian
Jerusalén
territory,
Oriental,
including
no
East
tiene validez
Jerusalem,
legal
are
y
illegal
constituye una
and
violación
constitute a
del derecho
violation of
internacional.
international law.
Chile siempre ha reafirmado como prioridad de
A
su política
priority of
exterior
Chile's foreign
el
policy
contribuir
has
a
always
alcanzar una
been to
solución
reaffirm
pacífica
a
en el Medio
peaceful
Oriente,
solution in the
expresando
Middle East.
constantemente
We have
nuestro apoyo
constantly
a
expressed
una
our
solución
support
justa y
for a
duradera
just and
conforme
lasting
a las
solution
resoluciones de
in
las Naciones
accordance
Unidas.
with UN resolutions.
Subrayamos que las
We
medidas
underscore the
cautelares
fact
adoptadas por la
that
Corte
provisional
Internacional de
measures
Justicia
adopted by the
deben ser
ICJ
cumplidas por
must be
todas las
complied with by
partes.
all parties.
Recordamos que
We
Chile,
recall
junto
that
con
Chile,
México,
along with
remitió a la
Mexico,
Corte Penal
submitted to
Internacional
the
un
ICC
escrito
a
sobre la
letter on the
situación
situation
en
in
Palestina para
Palestine
reforzar la
to
investigación de los
support
presuntos
the
crímenes de guerra
investigation of
y
alleged
crímenes
war
de lesa
crimes and
humanidad
crimes against
cometidos en
humanity
Gaza,
committed in
Cisjordania,
Gaza, the West
Jerusalén
Bank,
Este
East
e Israel.
Jerusalem, and Israel.
Para Chile, el
For Chile,
esclarecimiento de los
clarifying
hechos y
the facts
responsabilidades,
and the
así como la
perpetrators,
rendición
as
de
well as
cuentas,
ensuring
son
accountability,
esenciales
are
para poner
essential
fin
in
a la
order to put an
impunidad
end to
y prevenir
impunity
la
and to
futura
prevent
comisión
the
de
future
crímenes
commission of
internacionales.
international
Muchas gracias.
crimes. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Chile. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain.
Señor presidente, este debate tiene lugar en el contexto de una situación extremadamente grave en Gaza y donde una ofensiva militar en Rafah agravaría la devastadora crisis humanitaria y provocará una mayor inestabilidad, si cabe, regional que debemos evitar. Por ello, España sigue exigiendo un acuerdo para un alto al fuego inmediato que permita la entrada masiva y sin trabas de ayuda humanitaria en Gaza y la liberación inmediata de todos los rehenes israelíes. Tan pronto como se produzca un alto al fuego, debemos trabajar para consolidarlo y comenzar la gestión post-crisis. Será imprescindible apoyar a la autoridad palestina, que debe asumir el gobierno en Gaza y Cisjordania. Condenamos el ataque contra las instalaciones de UNRWA en Jerusalén que tuvo lugar la semana pasada y recordamos la obligación que establece el derecho internacional humanitario de proteger a los trabajadores humanitarios. Señor presidente, las aspiraciones nacionales de israelíes y palestinos y su deseo de vivir en paz y seguridad son pretensiones legítimas que deben tener respuesta. La ausencia de una solución satisfactoria está en el origen de este largo ciclo de violencia. España acoge con satisfacción la adopción de la resolución el pasado viernes que mi país apoyó y copatrocinó. La resolución permite reforzar las modalidades de participación de Palestina en esta asamblea y marca el comienzo del proceso de materialización de la solución de los dos estados, de la que el reconocimiento de Palestina a título nacional es un elemento fundamental. Por eso España ha tomado la decisión de reconocer a Palestina como Estado próximamente, sumándose a los más de 140 países que representan un creciente consenso de la comunidad internacional. Con estas decisiones dotaremos de mayor legitimidad al gobierno palestino, expulsando el extremismo del espacio público. Un Estado palestino es la mejor garantía de seguridad para Israel y para la región. Además, buscamos equilibrar el debate entre las partes en las negociaciones que tendrán lugar para finalizar el proceso de paz que echó a andar en la Conferencia de Madrid hace más de
which got
30
underway
años.
at the Madrid
Por
conference more
último,
than
con
30
el
years ago.
reconocimiento buscamos
Finally,
reforzar la coherencia y el
with this
respeto a la legalidad
recognition, we seek to
internacional. No
bolster
tenemos
coherence and respect for
dobles
international
raseros.
legality. We do
Señor
not
presidente,
hold with double
con objeto de
standards.
avanzar
Mr.
en la
President,
materialización de los
in
dos
order
estados,
to
España
work towards a two-state solution,
ha propuesto
Spain
una
has
conferencia de
proposed
paz
a
con
peace
las partes y
conference
con la
with the
comunidad
parties
internacional.
and the international community.
Esta propuesta ya ha
This
sido
proposal
respaldada
has
por la
already
Unión
been
Europea, la
endorsed by
Liga
the
de
European
Estados
Union, the
Árabes y la
League of Arab
Organización de
States, the
Cooperación
Organization of
Islámica.
Islamic
Más
Cooperation
de
as well.
80 de los
More than
estados que
80 of the
conformamos esta
states
Asamblea
which
General.
make up this General
Por eso
Assembly,
reiteramos el
and therefore we
llamamiento
reiterate the
para
appeal
que esta
for
organización de las
this
Naciones Unidas haga
United
suya
Nations
esta propuesta
organization
y
to
dirija
endorse this
el
proposal
proceso.
and
Muchas
to lead
gracias.
this process. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Spain. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of El Salvador.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Han pasado 26 años
26
desde que
years
se
have
convocó
passed
por primera vez
since
este 10º
the
periodo
very first
extraordinario
time
de sesiones
the
de emergencia en abril
emergency,
de
the 10th special
1997.
session
Hoy,
of the
esta
General
asamblea
Assembly
delibera
was held in
nuevamente sobre la
1997.
cuestión en el Medio
Once
Oriente,
again, the General
en un
Assembly is meeting
contexto
on
en
the
el que
issue of the
millones de
Middle East in a
personas han
context
huido
where
de sus
millions of
hogares en
people have
busca
fled
de
their homes
refugio.
seeking refuge
Decenas de
elsewhere.
miles, en su
Tens of
mayoría
thousands of
mujeres
them,
y
most of
niños,
them,
han perdido
women
sus
and
vidas,
children, have
y la
lost their
crisis
lives,
humanitaria,
and the humanitarian
lejos de mejorar,
crisis
se agudiza
is
cada día más.
worsening every day,
Mi
far
país
rather than
suma
improving.
su voz de
My
preocupación por
country
las
joins its
penurias que
voice
vive
of
la población
concern
de Gaza,
at the
sin
suffering
la
of the
posibilidad de
people in the
cubrir sus
Gaza Strip.
necesidades
They
más
cannot
básicas,
even meet their
como
most basic
alimentos,
needs, such
agua,
as
suministros
food, water,
médicos,
medical
afectando de
supplies.
manera
This
directa
has
la
directly
vida de miles de
impacted the
personas
lives of
inocentes.
thousands of innocent people.
Abordar con seriedad
To
y determinación la plena
address
membresía del
the
Estado
full
de Palestina en
membership
Naciones
of
Unidas
Palestine in the
se
United
plantea en las
Nations
condiciones actuales como un
is part
imperativo.
of the current
El Salvador
situation,
reconoce
and it is
y
an
tiene
imperative.
relaciones con
We
Palestina
recognize
desde
and
hace más
have
de una
had
década
relations with
y está
Palestine for more than a
consternado
decade,
por el
and
exacerbado
we are very
sufrimiento en su
concerned
pueblo.
by the great
Mi
suffering of
país,
its
por
people.
ello,
My country,
no ha dudado
therefore,
en brindar un
has
firme
had no
apoyo a
doubt
la
in
resolución
providing firm
adoptada
support
en
for
esta
this
sesión
resolution
especial de
adopted at
emergencia.
this ESS.
Admitir al Estado de Palestina
Admitting the
como
state of
miembro pleno de
Palestine as a
Naciones Unidas
full-fledged
es
member
un
of the
paso
United
crucial
Nations is a
hacia
crucial
el logro
step
de una solución
towards the
justa
achievement of a
y
just
duradera al
and
conflicto
lasting
y la
solution
estabilidad
to this
también del Medio
conflict
Oriente.
and to ensure
Es
stability in the
una
Middle East.
reafirmación
It
del
is a
compromiso de los
reaffirmation
Estados que
of
conforman
the states'
estas Naciones
commitment,
Unidas
the
de
states which
defender
make
sus
up
propios
this
principios
United
y
Nations
propósitos,
to
asegurando el
fulfill
pleno
their own
respeto de los
purposes and
derechos y la
principles,
dignidad
fully
del pueblo
respecting the
palestino,
dignity and the rights of the
incluyendo su
Palestinian
derecho a la
people, including
autodeterminación
their right
y
to
también vivir en paz.
self-determination and also to live in peace.
Señor presidente,
Mr.
tal como
President,
lo hemos expresado
as we have
recientemente,
said recently,
lamentamos
we regret
que el
the
Consejo de
fact
Seguridad se
that
haya ocupado
the
de esta cuestión
Security
desde hace
Council
más de
has been
7
addressing
décadas
this issue for
y
more
que
than 7
actuando
decades,
en nombre de toda la
and
membresía
acting
de
on
Naciones
behalf of the
Unidas
entire
y
membership of the
habiendo
United
celebrado
Nations,
centenares de
and
sesiones
having
oficiales,
adopted
no ha sido
hundreds of
capaz de
official
proveer
statements, it
una
has
solución
not been
amplia,
capable
justa
of
y
adopting a
duradera a
fair,
la cuestión de
lasting,
Palestina.
wide-reaching solution to the
Hacemos por ello
Palestinian
un
issue,
llamado a que el
and
Consejo
therefore
de
we
Seguridad
appeal to the
reconozca la
Security Council
necesidad
to
de que el pueblo
recognize the
palestino
need for the
ejerza
Palestinian
su
people
derecho a la
to
libre
exercise their
determinación
right to
y haga de la
self-determination
solución biestatal
and
una
to
realidad.
make the two-state solution a
La
reality.
posición de El Salvador
The
ha sido
position of El
coherente
Salvador
y
has been
consistente a través
consistent
de los años.
throughout the years.
Abogaremos siempre por una
We will
solución
always call
pacífica
for a
y
peaceful
definitiva al
and
conflicto
a
en Medio Oriente,
definitive solution to the Middle
cimentada
East issue.
en la existencia de dos estados
We
y
recognize the
reconociendo
need
la
for two
voluntad
states.
expresa de las
That is
resoluciones
the express
vinculantes del Consejo de Seguridad
will expressed
y también
in
las
the
resoluciones
binding
de la Asamblea
resolutions of
General
the
de
Security
Naciones
Council
Unidas.
as well as in the resolutions of the General
Permítame
Assembly.
reafirmar
Let me
que admitir
reaffirm
al Estado de
that
Palestina como
in
miembro
admitting
pleno
Palestine
de
as a
esta
full-fledged
organización
member to this
es hoy más
organization,
importante que
today
nunca.
that effort
El
is
Salvador
more
reitera su
important than
apoyo
ever.
al
El
derecho del
Salvador
pueblo palestino
supports the
a su
Palestinian
libre
people
determinación.
and their right to self-determination.
Exhortamos al Consejo de Seguridad a reconsiderar de manera favorable este asunto de máximo interés global y reafirme su compromiso con los derechos de paz, justicia, igualdad y derechos humanos para todos los pueblos.
and for the rights of all
Si bien esta
peoples.
resolución no
While this
otorga a
resolution
Palestina el
does not
estatus de
give
Estado miembro
Palestine
pleno en esta
the
organización, consideramos
status of
que
full-fledged
esta
membership in this
fortalecerá
organization, we believe
la
that it
práctica
will help
consuetudinaria y allanará su
support
participación
our
en
customary
diferentes
practice
espacios
and its
multilaterales.
involvement in a number of
Este contexto
international
permitirá al
fora. This
Estado de
context
Palestina
will enable
ejercer
the Palestinian state
progresivamente su legítimo
progressively
derecho
to
de
exercise its
intervenir de manera
legitimate
más
right
efectiva
to
e
have a more
igualitaria en Naciones Unidas.
fair and equal impact on the work of the
El
United
Salvador
Nations. El
se
Salvador
une en solidaridad con el
joins in
pueblo
solidarity with the
palestino y reitera
Palestinian
su
people, and
compromiso
we
con la
reiterate
paz,
our
la
commitment
seguridad
to peace
y la
and
justicia en la
security
región,
and justice
con
in the
pleno
region,
respeto
with
al
full
derecho
respect
internacional
for
y también
international law
la Carta de
and
Naciones
also for
Unidas.
the UN Charter.
Permítame finalizar
Let me conclude
con la reafirmación de
by
mi país
reaffirming
a su compromiso de
my
trabajar
country's
en
commitment
colaboración
to
con
work
todos los Estados
together
miembros
with all member
para
states
alcanzar una solución
to ensure
pacífica
a
y
peaceful
duradera a este
and lasting
conflicto.
solution to this
Confiamos
conflict.
en que
We
esta
trust
Asamblea
that
General,
this
a
General
través de la
Assembly,
sesión especial de
through the
emergencia,
ESS,
continuará
will
actuando con
continue
determinación
to act
para poner
decisively
fin al
to put
sufrimiento
an
del
end
pueblo
to the
palestino.
suffering of the
Muchísimas gracias,
Palestinian
señor
people.
presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of El Salvador. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brunei Darussalam.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. At the outset, Brunei Darussalam aligns itself with the joint statement delivered by Mauritania on behalf of the OIC, as well as the joint statement delivered by Uganda on behalf of the NAM. Mr. President, thank you for convening this 10th Emergency Special Session, ESS, in light of the recent failure of the UN Security Council in considering the UN membership for the State of Palestine. Brunei Darussalam has consistently advocated for the rights of the Palestinian people and have stood in solidarity with them, recognizing their inalienable rights to self-determination and statehood. We stand firm in our support for the State of Palestine to be accorded permanent membership to the United Nations. We deeply regret that the use of the veto has hampered the realization of a very important resolution, one that would allow for the State of Palestine to be granted a full membership in the UN, as we believe that it would represent a significant stride towards attaining enduring peace in the Middle East. Mr. President, Brunei Darussalam fully supports the resolution that has been tabled at this resumed ESS, and we welcome the adoption of this historic resolution. We must exhaust all efforts to ensure the admission of the State of Palestine as a full-fledged member of the United Nations. Mr. President, Brunei Darussalam unequivocally condemns the occupying powers' military operation in Rafah and subsequent takeover of the Rafah crossing, a vital passage for the delivery of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. This unacceptable move by the occupying power represents a dangerous escalation that has killed more innocent civilians, including women and children, and ignores the international calls to protect the safety and lives of millions of Palestinians seeking refuge in the area. The situation in Palestine is already a humanitarian crisis of profound proportion perpetuated by the occupying powers' continued disregard of international law with impunity. There must be a halt to all the violence, injustice, and oppression by the occupying power against the Palestinians. Mr. President, it is also important to ensure that the root causes of the conflict are resolved to prevent further destabilization and escalation of violence in the region, with the aim to bring about a permanent solution to the conflict. Towards this end, we urge the international community to remain resolute in their commitment to the two-state solution towards achieving an independent state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Brunei Darussalam. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Oman.
شكرا سعادة الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President,
لي في مستهل
بياني
نيابة عن وفد سلطنة عمان أن أتقدم إليكم ببالغ الشكر على عقد هذه الجلسة
for having convened this meeting and this following the failure of the Security Council to grant a full accession of Palestine to the United Nations. In this regard, my country applauds the vote by the General Assembly with an overwhelming majority vote on resolution in favor of the state of Palestine's membership to the United Nations. The global majority has exhorted the Security Council to recognize the state of Palestine. This is a practical way to allow us to implement the two-state solution and to achieve peace in line with resolutions under international law. We fully align ourselves with the statements delivered by the UAE on behalf of the Arab state, as well as the statement delivered by Mauritania on behalf of the OIC and Uganda on behalf of non-aligned movement.
لمطلب دولة فلسطين المشروع
urge the international community to support the legitimate request of the state of Palestine to membership at full membership at the United Nations. Like all other countries in the world. Mr. President,
تعرب سلطنة عمان عن بالغ القلق
my country is very much concerned in light of the military escalation carried out by the Israeli occupying power, as well as the deaths and war crimes of Palestinian people in Palestinian cities, the military operations that are being carried out by the occupying power in Rafah will have devastating consequences that are liable to expand the conflict and further foment tensions in the region. My country, the Sultanate of Oman, urges the international community to immediately intervene to end this war and to end the barbaric acts being perpetrated by Israel and to respect IHL. Israel has a duty needs to be held accountable after the war crimes, after the starvation, the famine, insofar as these constitute crimes against humanity. Mr. President, my country believes that the end to the conflict in the Middle East hinges on the establishment of a Palestinian state and granting Palestine a status of full membership at the United Nations. This is a strategic priority, which is of paramount importance. It is a global demand on the part of the international community. We call upon the Security Council to reconsider the question of the admission of Palestine as a member of the United Nations. The rejection of this kind of a request threatens international peace and security and undermines the credibility of the Security Council, which has embraced a double standards approach when it comes to the question of Palestine. To conclude, we reiterate our support for peace efforts and a two-state solution with the peaceful coexistence of the two states. We reject all plans that are at variance with peace and the two-state solution, and we will support the legitimate request of the Palestinian people and the request to gain full membership in the United Nations. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Oman. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Morocco.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. أود في البداية
أن أشكر السيد رئيس الجمعية العامة على الاستجابة لطلب المجموعات العربية والإسلامية وعدم الانحياز لاستئناف أعمال الدورة الاستثنائية الطارئة العاشرة. لقد رحبت المملكة المغربية باعتماد الجمعية العامة يوم الجمعة الماضي القرار الذي يدعم طلب دولة فلسطين للحصول على العضوية الكاملة بمنظمة الأمم المتحدة ويوصي مجلس الأمن بإعادة النظر إيجابا في طلب قبولها كما يمنحها مزيدا من الحقوق في إطار المنظمة الأممية ولقد كانت المملكة المغربية من أوائل الدول التي رعت هذا القرار ودعمته ويعتبر هذا القرار خطوة مهمة حيث أصبحت مسألة انضمام دولة فلسطين للأمم المتحدة ومنحها العضوية الكاملة مسألة ضرورية لكونها تندرج في إطار حل الدولتين المتوافق عليه دوليا كما تجدد المملكة المغربية التي رأسها عاهلها جلالة الملك محمد السادس نصره الله لجنة القدس المنبثقة عن منظمة التعاون الإسلامي التأكيد على موقفها الثابت والتاريخي والراسخ من عدالة القضية الفلسطينية وحقوق الشعب الفلسطيني المشروعة وفي مقدمتها حقه في إقامة دولته الفلسطينية المستقلة على حدود الرابع من يونيو 1967 وعاصمة East Jerusalem as its capital. إن الكارثة الإنسانية التي يشهدها قطاع غزة منذ 7 أشهر تفوق الوصف وتهدد الأمن والسلم الإقليميين كما لها تداعيات على العالم بأسره.
In Gaza, and this has repercussions for both the region and the entire world. We have condemned the Israeli military actions undertaken in the Strip. These actions, which run counter to international humanitarian law. There are thousands of victims, civilian casualties, health infrastructure is being destroyed, and educational infrastructure is also being destroyed, which undermines the ability to uphold IHL. We emphasize the need for a ceasefire and the need for access to humanitarian assistance in sufficient quantities in a safe, secure, and unimpeded way in the Gaza Strip. And my country has participated in these efforts since the outbreak of this crisis, and we have done so following the orders of His Majesty the King. Furthermore, we wish to reiterate the importance of protection of civilians and the importance of the protection of humanitarian personnel in line with IHL. Furthermore, there's a need to release the hostages and detainees.
تشدد المملكة المغربية على عدم قبول التهديد بتوسيع العمليات العسكرية لتشمل كافة مناطق قطاع غزة بما فيها رفح لما يمكن أن يؤدي إلى تفاقم الأوضاع الإنسانية الكارثية
This would have
كما تجدد المملكة المغربية رفضها التام لكافة أشكال التهجير القسري والعقاب الجماعي والأعمال الانتقامية وتدعو إلى وقف الإجراءات الإسرائيلية الأحادية التي تطال الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة بما فيها القدس الشريف والمسجد الأقصى المبارك فمدينة القدس يجب أن تبقى أرضا للقاء ورمزا للتعايش السلمي بالنسبة لأتباع الديانات التوحيدية الثلاث ومركزا لقيم الاحترام المتبادل والحوار. السيد الرئيس في الختام أود التذكير بما جاء في الخطاب الثاني لجلالة الملك محمد السادس نصره الله إلى المشاركين في القمة 15 لمنظمة التعاون الإسلامي التي انعقدت في العاصمة الغامبية بنجول بتاريخ 4 مايو 2024 وأقتبس
In 2024, and I quote, we call upon affluent countries to shoulder their historic responsibility and to embrace the path of reason to meaningfully engage in reversing this devastating situation and to establish conducive conditions for a meaningful peace process, and this with the aim of achieving a two-state solution. End of quote. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Morocco. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mauritius.
Mr. President, Mauritius welcomes the adoption of the General Assembly resolution declaring that Palestine is qualified for full membership and therefore should be admitted in the United Nations. The resounding support garnered from the General Assembly on this historic resolution is a meaningful achievement. We have witnessed the triumph of solidarity and justice towards Palestine and the Palestinian people as the international community affirms its rightful place among the family of nations. The result achieved is more than timely and is the logical consequence of the adoption of the 2012 UN resolution granting the status of non-member observer to Palestine, which Mauritius supported. Mr. President, Mauritius has consistently stood in solidarity with the Palestinian people, affirming their legitimate right to self-determination and their aspirations for the establishment of a sovereign, viable, and secure Palestine state through peaceful means. We are convinced that the admission of Palestine as a full-fledged member of our organization would be a major step ahead towards the recognition and implementation of the two-state solution in accordance with all relevant United Nations resolutions and international law. Mauritius has consistently supported the application made by Palestine for membership in the UN, including its admission as a member of the UNESCO in 2011. Since 2012, we have actively advocated for Palestine's full membership in the United Nations through various resolutions. We hold the view that the United Nations and the international community bear a solemn responsibility to uphold the dignity of the Palestinian people and safeguard their fundamental rights, including the right to statehood and security. Furthermore, Mauritius believes that Palestine fulfills all necessary criteria to be acknowledged as a sovereign state. Its accession, therefore, would be in accordance with Article 4 of the United Nations Charter. Mauritius joins the call for the Security Council to reconsider Palestine's application for membership. The dire humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza underscores the urgent need for action on part of our organization. We firmly believe that granting full membership status to Palestine will pave the way for peace, facilitated under the auspices of the United Nations and the international community. Mr. President, Palestine has for far too long been denied the right to be fully part of this organization. We believe that this resolution will pave the way for a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace in the Middle East. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mauritius. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Dominica on behalf of the Caribbean community.
Mr. President, Excellencies, colleagues, I have the honor to take the floor on behalf of the 14 member states of the Caribbean community. On this historic occasion, CARICOM affirmed our collective support for this important General Assembly resolution. We did so because CARICOM recognizes the right of the Palestinian people to their own state, and because we believe this state is entitled to take its rightful place here in the United Nations. This position is in keeping with relevant resolutions adopted by this General Assembly. We take this opportunity to reiterate our great distress at the ongoing violence and deteriorating situation in Gaza, which has resulted in the tragic loss of civilian lives, including the deaths of women and children on an unprecedented scale, and widespread displacement and suffering. We are particularly concerned at the escalating situation in Rafah and urge maximum restraint to avoid a catastrophe of unprecedented proportion. CARICOM reiterates its strong condemnation of the attacks by Hamas and the taking of hostages on 7 October 2023. as well as of the Israeli actions that violate international humanitarian law and the human rights of the Palestinian people. In this regard, CARICOM urges an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza and safe and unimpeded access for the delivery of adequate and sustained humanitarian assistance. We strongly advocate full compliance with the rule of law and therefore call for the unconditional release of all hostages. We further call for the release of all those illegally detained. CARICOM reaffirms its unwavering commitment to a holistic roadmap towards a two-state solution. In keeping with the United Nations Security Council, Resolution 242, as the only viable path to peace between Israelis and Palestinians. The community therefore calls for a renewed commitment to a peaceful resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through meaningful dialogue and negotiation, and calls upon the international community to play a constructive role in facilitating a lasting solution to the conflict and achieving a durable peace that guarantees the human rights, dignity, and security of both sides. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegation representative of Dominica, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Maldives.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank you for resuming the 10th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly. The United Nations was founded on the principles of supporting the rights of all peoples to determine their own political, economic, and social destinies. The General Assembly remains the only dedicated space where we, the people of the United Nations, can convene to advocate for justice, for human rights and dignity, for peace and freedom. We all agree that the peace is long overdue. We have made calls for a ceasefire for de-escalation. We have desperately pleaded for the protection of Palestinian civilians and their legal and humanitarian rights. The difficult point of contention within this hall has been on the question of how to bring a just and lasting peace. The goal must be to take action for peace. The Maldives commends the United Arab Emirates for taking the initiative to put forward the resolution determining that Palestine is ready to be admitted as a member of the United Nations. As a proud co-sponsor of this resolution, we are moved by overwhelming support extended by member states to the Palestinian cause by voting yes on the resolution. Our collective call sends a strong message to the Security Council to reconsidering the application of the Palestinian for full UN membership favorably. The Maldives commends the tireless efforts on the ground in Gaza, at the United Nations, and across the world to stop the suffering borne by the Palestinian people. The Maldives recognizes the relentless determinations of organizations like UNRWA in Palestine. They are the heroes who have allowed us to hold on to hope against all the odds. In the face of the immense humanitarian tragedy taking place in Palestine, the Maldives reiterates its call to all member states to act with urgency. Madam President, Israel's impunity must end. Israel's rejection of the ceasefire last Monday demonstrates that its intention has always been to land grab, enforce apartheid policies, and commit genocide. The systematic, deliberate, and brutal attacks against the Palestinian people did not begin on 7th October. Israel has inflicted collective punishment, mass destruction, forced displacement, and unimaginable trauma on the Palestinian people over 7 decades. Israel's ongoing operation in Rafah is the latest and most terrible of its aggression. There are more than 1 million Palestinians in Rafah who have been driven into the city for shelter. Many of them are children. Many of them are sick, injured, malnourished, traumatized, and living with disabilities because of Israel's action. Israeli supporters must do more than make hollow statements to hold it accountable. The Maldives calls on Israeli supporters to stop supplying Israel with weapons and to make Israel comply with their obligations under international law and international humanitarian law. We can only bring comprehensive solution to the conflict in the Middle East with a recognition of Palestine. The Maldives remains resolute in supporting the Palestinian people in their inalienable right to self-determination. The Maldives further reiterates its call for establishment of a sovereign and independent state of Palestine, with East Jerusalem as its capital in line with the pre-1967 borders. Maldives once again implores the Security Council to favorably reconsider the admission of the State of Palestine as a member of the United Nations, as urged by the General Assembly resolution adopted on Friday. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Maldives, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Vietnam.
Madam President, I wish to thank the President of the General Assembly for resuming this emergency special session. Vietnam aligns itself with the statement made by the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. Madam President, more than 7 months into the Gaza conflict, peace prospects remain elusive. Fears of escalation into regional war are growing amidst direct confrontation between the region's major military powers. There's no sign of diminished violence or an end to civilian deaths. Vietnam is deeply concerned about these increased hostilities and tension. The impending ground offensive on Rafah in particular would take an unimaginable toll on civilians, especially on women and children, and further aggravate the ongoing humanitarian crisis. Vietnam strongly condemns all forms of indiscriminate violence, targeting civilians and critical civilian infrastructure. We firmly oppose all acts in violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of any state. In this regard, Vietnam urges all parties to exercise utmost restraint, engage in dialogues, and strictly abide by international law, the UN Charter, and relevant UN resolutions. We renew our call for an immediate cessation of hostilities and violence and unconditional release of all hostages. We urge that all measures are taken to ensure unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance and reaffirm Vietnam's continued support for UNRWA's central role in this regard. Vietnam supports all ongoing diplomatic efforts towards an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza to put a stop to civilian casualties and sufferings. In the long run, a lasting, just, and peaceful resolution to the Gaza conflict and the Middle East peace process can only be achieved through the two-state solution in conformity with international law and relevant UN resolutions. We are disappointed that last month the Security Council once again failed to reach agreement on the overdue admission of Palestine as a UN member state. This goes against the will of not only the Palestinian people, but also the majority of the international community. Artificial and political motivated obstacles continue to hinder Palestine's legitimate quest for further membership. Mr. President, Vietnam stands with the Palestinian people in the plight to exercise their inalienable right to self-determination and supports Palestine's early admission to the United Nations. Our long-standing solidarity and unwavering support for the Palestinian people are deeply rooted in our common and long struggle for sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness of our peoples. Vietnam's own path to the UN membership was a long and arduous one. It fell victim to the Security Council veto on numerous occasions. The many barriers and obstacles, however, did not stop the irreversible course of history and prevent the peace-loving nation of Vietnam's eventual admission to the United Nations in 1977. We witnessed history last Friday as the State of Palestine inched closer to full membership with the adoption of the GA resolution that allows Palestine greater engagement in the work of the UN. Vietnam co-sponsored and voted in favor of this monumental resolution together with a large majority of this august body. The legitimate aspirations of millions of Palestinian people, Palestinians for peace, development, and equality must not be denied. Palestine's admission to the UN as a full member would be the most conducive to the two-state solution, as it lays the ground for meaningful negotiations between the parties on an equal footing. And that would be an important step towards achieving sustainable peace and stability in the Middle East and beyond. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Vietnam, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of plurinational state of Bolivia.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'd like to begin by thanking you for convening this meeting to address one of the most important priority issues at the United Nations, so that finally we will see the light at the end of the tunnel for the Palestinian people. At the same time, I thank the UAE for introducing the draft resolution on admitting new members to the United Nations on behalf of the Arab group, and we endorse the statements made on Friday by the Republic of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on behalf of the group of friends in defense of the UN Charter.
Señora Presidenta,
Madam President,
las palabras y los discursos resultan siendo
words and
insuficientes
discourse
frente a la
are always
violencia,
insufficient in
el
the face of
derramamiento de
violence,
sangre y los ataques
bloodshed,
atroces
and
contra el pueblo
atrocious attacks
palestino,
against the
que han
Palestinian people.
alcanzado niveles absolutamente
They have
inhumanos,
reached
causando el
absolutely inhuman
sufrimiento
levels, causing
inimaginable de
unimaginable
niños,
suffering
mujeres,
for children,
ancianos,
women, the
personas
elderly,
inocentes,
and
que lo
innocent
único que
people.
desean es vivir
All they
en paz
wish
y
is to
libertad.
live in peace and freedom.
Israel, la potencia ocupante,
Israel, the
desde el pasado
occupying
7 de
power,
octubre,
since
no ha
the 7th
cesado
of
un
October,
segundo sus intensos
has
bombardeos y
not stopped
ataques
for
contra los
1
territorios
second in its
palestinos.
shelling and attacks
Como
against
se ha
innocent
informado a la
Palestinian
fecha,
people.
más de
To date,
34,000
more than
personas han sido
34,000
asesinadas
people have been
y
killed,
1.7
and
millones de
1.7
personas,
million
que
people,
representan cerca
which
del
represents some
75% de la población,
75% of the
han sido
population,
desplazadas
have been
en toda la
displaced
franja de Gaza,
throughout the Gaza
porque ya
Strip,
no existe ningún lugar
because there is
seguro
now
para
no
ellas
safe
y
place for
ellos.
them.
El próximo 15 de mayo los
On the
palestinos
15th of May, the
rememorarán
Palestinians
el
will
día del NAPCA,
recall
lo cual nos recuerda
the
los
NAPCA
hechos
Day,
de hace
which recalls the
76
events
años,
of 76
cuando el
years
mundo
ago,
observó
when the
con los
world
brazos cruzados
stood by
que
with its
cientos de
arms
miles de
crossed and
palestinos
watched hundreds of
fueran
thousands of
obligados a huir
Palestinians who
o
were
verse
forced to flee
expulsados de sus
or
hogares,
who were expelled
y
from their
pareciera
homes.
que hoy
And it
Estamos
seems today
frente a una inminente ofensiva
that
militar de Israel en
we are
Rafah,
going to witness
a
an
pesar de
imminent
los
military
llamados de la
offensive by
comunidad
Israel in
internacional
Rafah,
para que se
despite the
evite
appeals of the
una
international
nueva acción
community to
genocida en
avoid
Gaza.
that, a new genocide in
Adicionalmente,
Gaza.
se ha
In addition to
bloqueado
that,
completamente el
there has been
flujo
a
de la ayuda
complete
humanitaria.
blockade on the influx of
Presidenta,
humanitarian aid.
aprovecho esta
President, I
oportunidad
take
para
this
compartir con
opportunity
ustedes
to
que
share
la
with
semana
you
pasada mi
that
país
last week my
entregó más de
country
90 toneladas de ayuda humanitaria en
provided
el
more
puesto
than 90
egipcio
tons
de Alejandría
of
a la Media Luna Roja
supplies
para que
through
sea
the
distribuido en la franja de Gaza.
Red Crescent
Estas
in
cargas
Egypt destined
contienen
for
mayoritariamente
Gaza.
medicinas,
Primarily, the
alimentos
supplies include
básicos,
basic
entre otros
foodstuffs
insumos,
and medicine,
y hacemos
as well
un
as other
llamado para que
supplies.
no se
And
obstaculice
we
su
ask
distribución.
that the distribution not
Presidenta y
be
distinguidos
impeded.
colegas,
President,
la
distinguished
Organización
colleagues,
de las Naciones
the
Unidas
United
tiene una
Nations
deuda histórica con el
has a
pueblo
historic
palestino,
debt to the Palestinian
que hace
people.
más de 7 décadas le
More
prometió
than 7
constituir los
decades
dos
ago,
estados.
it promised to
Y
provide a
lamentablemente al
two-state
día de hoy
solution, and
se
regrettably,
implementaron todas las
today,
decisiones relativas a Israel y por diversas
for a
circunstancias,
number of
no así
circumstances,
los referidos a Palestina.
it has not
Es un
complied with
tiempo
its
que la ONU, la
promises to
comunidad
Palestine.
internacional
It is
haga
now time for
cumplir
the international
todas las
community to
resoluciones
fulfill
pertinentes sobre el
all
tema
relevant
sin
resolutions
mayores
on this issue
dilaciones
without
y
any further
obstáculos
delay
de
or
Israel y
obstacle
su protector.
by Israel and its protector.
Es por ello que mi país
For that
aplaude el
reason, my
compromiso y la
country
decisión de
welcomes the
todos los
commitment and
estados
the
que
decision
votaron
by
a
all
favor
states
de la
who
resolución
voted in
sobre la
favor of the
admisión de
resolution
nuevos
on
miembros de
admitting
las
new
Naciones Unidas,
members to the United Nations.
como lo hizo Bolivia
As
copatrocinando
Bolivia
y
has
votando a
done in the
favor,
past, we
lo cual
co-sponsored and
representa
voted in
nuestro
favor.
firme
This
compromiso
is our firm
y apoyo
commitment
a la
and
admisión de
show of
Palestina
support for
como
the
Estado
admission of
miembro
Palestine
pleno de las
as a
Naciones
full-fledged member
Unidas.
to the United Nations.
La inclusión de Palestina
inclusion
no
of
solo es un
Palestine
acto de
is
justicia y
not just an
reconocimiento,
act of
sino
justice and
también
recognition,
un pequeño
but
paso
rather it's
hacia la
also
paz
one
y la
small
estabilidad
step
de la
towards
región.
peace and stability in the region.
Palestina ha demostrado
Palestine
su compromiso
has
con los
proven its
principios y
commitment
valores
to the
fundamentales
principles,
de
the
las
founding
Naciones
principles and
Unidas
values of the
y
United
cumple con
Nations,
las
and
prerrogativas
it
de la
meets
Carta de
the
las Naciones
prerogatives
Unidas,
of the UN
en
Charter,
particular
in
con el
particular
requisito número
with
4, para
prerequisite
su
number
admisión
4
como Estado
for its
miembro
admission
pleno de la
as a
ONU.
full-fledged member of the United Nations.
Adicionalmente, al día de hoy,
Moreover, today,
143 Estados miembros de
143
las
member
Naciones
states of the
Unidas
United Nations
reconocen a Palestina como
recognize
un Estado
Palestine
soberano e
as a sovereign
independiente
and
que ejerce
independent
sus
state,
derechos
exercising
y
its
asume sus
rights
obligaciones.
and shouldering its
Por otra parte,
responsibilities.
la admisión de
Moreover,
Palestina
the
como
admission of
miembro de las
Palestine
Naciones
as a
Unidas
member of the
es
United
un paso
Nations
fundamental
is
hacia
an
la
essential
construcción
step
de
towards
un orden mundial
building
más justo
a
y
more just
equitativo,
and fair world
donde
order,
todas las naciones sean
where
tratadas
all
con igual
nations
respeto
are
y
treated with
dignidad.
equal respect and dignity.
La aprobación mayoritaria a la
The
resolución
majority
es
approval
la
for
muestra
the
del
resolution
consenso
is
mayoritario,
proof of
por lo cual el Consejo
majority
de Seguridad
consensus, and therefore
debe
the Security
reconsiderar de
Council must
inmediato
immediately
favorablemente esta cuestión,
reconsider in a
tomando en
positive light
cuenta además
this
la opinión
proposal
consultiva de la Corte
in view of
Internacional
the
de
fact
Justicia
that
del
the
28 de mayo de
ICJ decision of the
1948
28th of
y
May
en
of
estricta
1948
conformidad
and in strict
con el
compliance
artículo
with
4 de
Article
la
4
Carta de
of
las
the UN
Naciones
Charter.
Unidas. Ni un paso atrás.
We should not take
Palestina
any
hoy
steps back.
necesita de
Today,
la solidaridad
Palestine
y la
needs
cooperación
solidarity
internacional,
and cooperation
y es ahora
from
que
the
debemos
world.
entregarle
And
certezas.
now we must
Palestina
come through
será libre,
with
soberana
our promises, a free and
independiente, con las
independent
fronteras
sovereign
anteriores a
state
1967,
within the
con Jerusalén
1967
Oriental como
borders
su
with East
capital.
Jerusalem
Muchas
as
gracias.
capital. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the plurinational state of Bolivia, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Señora Presidenta,
Madam
apoyamos
President,
la reanudación de
we
este
support the
periodo
resumption
extraordinario
of
de
this
sesiones de
10th
emergencia de la
ESS
Asamblea
of the
General
General
de las
Assembly.
Naciones Unidas. Cuba copatrocinó
Cuba co-sponsored and supported the draft resolution L30/Rev1, which was recently adopted in this General Assembly to allow for the admission of the State of Palestine as a full-fledged member of the UN organization. Without further delay, we must reverse the historic injustice which has denied the Palestinian people the right to participate on an equal footing in the United Nations. It's unacceptable and shameful that the government of the United States has self-proclaimed to lead democracy worldwide is once again abusing its anti-democratic veto power to be complicit with Israel and to block the clear majority opinion of the international community. The Security Council was designed to act on behalf of the member states of the organization for the maintenance of international peace and security, and not to protect hegemonic interests of the United States or the intentions of Israel. The international community cannot allow this unsustainable situation to continue. The veto power is an arbitrary power and is denied Palestine its rightful admission to the United Nations. This would be an essential step for working towards a wide, sweeping and fair and lasting solution to the Middle East problem. This calls for the true exercise by the Palestinian people of their right to self-determination and their right to build their own independent and sovereign state within pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as capital. There is no other effective way of ensuring once and for all that this spiral of violence will end so that we can save lives and set the path for peace. 104 countries have now recognized the State of Palestine, and the figure continues to rise. The State of Palestine is an active member of the international community in multilateral fora and is subject to the rights and obligations of a number of international instruments. The draft resolution which was approved gives justice because it recognizes that Palestine fulfills the conditions to be a full-fledged member of the UN. Madam President, Cuba once again calls for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in the illegally occupied Palestinian territories. We call for an end to violence and to warmongering. Humanitarian aid must be provided urgently in sufficient amounts for the Palestinian people. We must put an end to the forced displacement of the Palestinian people. They have a right to live there. We firmly condemn the killing of civilians, in particular women, children, and humanitarian workers from the UN system. The indiscriminate shelling against the people in Gaza and the destruction of housing, civilian infrastructure and hospitals, as well as the denial of basic services for the people, have further worsened the precarious humanitarian situation as a result of the blockade on the Gaza Strip and flagrantly violate international humanitarian law. Nothing can justify such actions. This is a collective punishment and is a war crime and crime against humanity. Those who are opposed for various pretexts to a ceasefire should bear the responsibility for the serious fallout. Every day, more innocent lives are lost. We must not remain indifferent. Cuba is not indifferent. We remain committed to the Palestinian cause, and Cuba will continue to contribute to the best of its ability to legitimate international efforts to put an end to these atrocities suffered by the sisterly Palestinian people. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cuba, and I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq.
We all agree that the peace is long overdue. We have made calls for a ceasefire for de-escalation. We have desperately pleaded for the protection of Palestinian civilians and their legal and humanitarian rights. The difficult point of contention within this hall has been on the question of how to bring a just and lasting peace. The goal must be to take action for peace. The Maldives commends the United Arab Emirates for taking the initiative to put forward the resolution determining that Palestine is ready to be admitted as a member of the United Nations. As a proud co-sponsor of this resolution, we are moved by overwhelming support extended by member states to the Palestinian cause by voting yes on the resolution. Our collective call sends a strong message to the Security Council to reconsidering the application of the Palestinian for full UN membership favorably. The Maldives commends the tireless efforts on the ground in Gaza, at the United Nations, and across the world to stop the suffering borne by the Palestinian people. The Maldives recognizes the relentless determinations of organizations like UNRWA in Palestine. They are the heroes who have allowed us to hold on to hope against all the odds. In the face of the immense humanitarian tragedy taking place in Palestine, the Maldives reiterates its call to all member states to act with urgency. Madam President, Israel's impunity must end. Israel's rejection of the ceasefire last Monday demonstrates that its intention has always been to land grab, enforce apartheid policies, and commit genocide. The systematic, deliberate, and brutal attacks against the Palestinian people did not begin on 7th October. Israel has inflicted collective punishment, mass destruction, forced displacement, and unimaginable trauma on the Palestinian people over 7 decades. Israel's ongoing operation in Rafah is the latest and most terrible of its aggression. There are more than 1 million Palestinians in Rafah who have been driven into the city for shelter. Many of them are children. Many of them are sick, injured, malnourished, traumatized, and living with disabilities because of Israel's action. Israeli supporters must do more than make hollow statements to hold it accountable. The Maldives calls on Israeli supporters to stop supplying Israel with weapons and to make Israel comply with their obligations under international law and international humanitarian law. We can only bring comprehensive solution to the conflict in the Middle East with a recognition of Palestine. The Maldives remains resolute in supporting the Palestinian people in their inalienable right to self-determination. The Maldives further reiterates its call for establishment of a sovereign and independent state of Palestine, with East Jerusalem as its capital in line with the pre-1967 borders. Maldives once again implores the Security Council to favorably reconsider the admission of the State of Palestine as a member of the United Nations, as urged by the General Assembly resolution adopted on Friday. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Maldives, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Vietnam.
Madam President, I wish to thank the President of the General Assembly for resuming this emergency special session. Vietnam aligns itself with the statement made by the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. Madam President, more than 7 months into the Gaza conflict, peace prospects remain elusive. Fears of escalation into regional war are growing amidst direct confrontation between the region's major military powers. There's no sign of diminished violence or an end to civilian deaths. Vietnam is deeply concerned about these increased hostilities and tension. The impending ground offensive on Rafah in particular would take an unimaginable toll on civilians, especially on women and children, and further aggravate the ongoing humanitarian crisis. Vietnam strongly condemns all forms of indiscriminate violence, targeting civilians and critical civilian infrastructure. We firmly oppose all acts in violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of any state. In this regard, Vietnam urges all parties to exercise utmost restraint, engage in dialogues, and strictly abide by international law, the UN Charter, and relevant UN resolutions. We renew our call for an immediate cessation of hostilities and violence and unconditional release of all hostages. We urge that all measures are taken to ensure unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance and reaffirm Vietnam's continued support for UNRWA's central role in this regard. Vietnam supports all ongoing diplomatic efforts towards an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza to put a stop to civilian casualties and sufferings. In the long run, a lasting, just, and peaceful resolution to the Gaza conflict and the Middle East peace process can only be achieved through the two-state solution in conformity with international law and relevant UN resolutions. We are disappointed that last month the Security Council once again failed to reach agreement on the overdue admission of Palestine as a UN member state. This goes against the will of not only the Palestinian people, but also the majority of the international community. Artificial and political motivated obstacles continue to hinder Palestine's legitimate quest for further membership. Mr. President, Vietnam stands with the Palestinian people in the plight to exercise their inalienable right to self-determination and supports Palestine's early admission to the United Nations. Our long-standing solidarity and unwavering support for the Palestinian people are deeply rooted in our common and long struggle for sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness of our peoples. Vietnam's own path to the UN membership was a long and an arduous one. It fell victim to the Security Council veto on numerous occasions. The many barriers and obstacles, however, did not stop the irreversible course of history and prevent the peace-loving nation of Vietnam's eventual admission to the United Nations in 1977. We witnessed history last Friday as the State of Palestine inched closer to full membership with the adoption of the GA resolution that allows Palestine greater engagement in the work of the UN. Vietnam co-sponsored and voted in favor of this monumental resolution together with a large majority of this august body. The legitimate aspirations of millions of Palestinian people, Palestinians for peace, development, and equality must not be denied. Palestine's admission to the UN as a full member would be the most conducive to the two-state solution, as it lays the ground for meaningful negotiations between the parties on an equal footing. And that would be an important step towards achieving sustainable peace and stability in the Middle East and beyond. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Vietnam, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of plurinational state of Bolivia.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'd like to begin by thanking you for convening this meeting to address one of the most important priority issues at the United Nations so that finally we will see the light at the end of the tunnel for the Palestinian people. At the same time, I thank the UAE for introducing the draft resolution on admitting new members to the United Nations on behalf of the Arab group, and we endorse the statements made on Friday by the Republic of Uganda on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on behalf of the Group of Friends in Defense of the UN Charter. Madam President, words and discourse are always insufficient in the face of violence, bloodshed, and atrocious attacks against the Palestinian people. They have reached absolutely inhuman levels, causing unimaginable suffering for children, women, the elderly, and innocent people. All they wish is to live in peace and freedom. Israel, the occupying power, since the 7th of October, has not stopped for 1 second in its shelling and attacks against innocent Palestinian people. To date, more than 34,000 people have been killed, and 1.7 million people, which represents some 75% of the population, have been displaced throughout the Gaza Strip because there is now no safe place for them. On the 15th of May, the Palestinians will recall the Nakba Day, which recalls the events of 76 years ago when the world stood by with its arms crossed and watched hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who were forced to flee or who were expelled from their homes. And it seems today that we are going to witness an imminent military offensive by Israel in Rafah, despite the appeals of the international community to avoid that, a new genocide in Gaza. In addition to that, there has been a complete blockade on the influx of humanitarian aid. President, I take this opportunity to share with you that last week my country provided more than 90 tons of supplies through the Red Crescent in Egypt destined for Gaza. Primarily, the supplies include basic foodstuffs and medicine, as well as other supplies, and we ask that the distribution not be impeded. President, distinguished colleagues, the United Nations has a historic debt to the Palestinian people. More than 7 decades ago, it promised to provide a two-state solution, and regrettably, today, for a number of circumstances, it has not complied with its promises to Palestine. It is now time for the international community to fulfill all relevant resolutions on this issue without any further delay or obstacle by Israel and its protector. For that reason, my country welcomes the commitment and the decision by all states who voted in favor of the resolution on admitting new members to the United Nations. As Bolivia has done in the past, we co-sponsored and voted in favor. This is our firm commitment and show of support for the admission of Palestine as a full-fledged member to the United Nations. The inclusion of Palestine is not just an act of justice and recognition, but rather it's also one small step towards peace and stability in the region. Palestine has proven its commitment to the principles, the founding principles and values of the United Nations, and it meets the prerogatives of the UN Charter, in particular with prerequisite number 4 for its admission as a full-fledged member of the United Nations. Moreover, today, 143 member states of the United Nations recognize Palestine as a sovereign and independent state, exercising its rights and shouldering its responsibilities. Moreover, the admission of Palestine as a member of the United Nations is an essential step towards building a more just and fair world order, where all nations are treated with equal respect and dignity. The majority approval for the resolution is proof of majority consensus, and therefore the Security Council must immediately reconsider in a positive light this proposal in view of the fact that the ICJ decision of the 28th of May of 1948 and in strict compliance with Article 4 of the UN Charter. We should not take any steps back. Today, Palestine needs solidarity and cooperation from the world. And now we must come through with our promises, a free and independent sovereign state within the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as capital. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the plurinational state of Bolivia, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Madam President, we support the resumption of this 10th ESS of the General Assembly. Cuba co-sponsored and supported the draft resolution L30/Rev1, which was recently adopted in this General Assembly to allow for the admission of the State of Palestine as a full-fledged member of the UN organization. Without further delay, we must reverse the historic injustice which has denied the Palestinian people the right to participate on an equal footing in the United Nations. It's unacceptable and shameful that the government of the United States has self-proclaimed to lead democracy worldwide, is once again abusing its anti-democratic veto power to be complicit with Israel and to block the clear majority opinion of the international community. The Security Council was designed to act on behalf of the member states of the organization for the maintenance of international peace and security, and not to protect hegemonic interests of the United States or the intentions of Israel. The international community cannot allow this unsustainable situation to continue. The veto power is an arbitrary power and is denied Palestine its rightful admission to the United Nations. This would be an essential step for working towards a wide, sweeping and fair and lasting solution to the Middle East problem. This calls for the true exercise by the Palestinian people of their right to self-determination and their right to build their own independent and sovereign state within pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as capital. There is no other effective way of ensuring once and for all that this spiral of violence will end so that we can save lives and set the path for peace. 104 countries have now recognized the State of Palestine, and the figure continues to rise. The State of Palestine is an active member of the international community in multilateral fora and is subject to the rights and obligations of a number of international instruments. The draft resolution which was approved gives justice because it recognizes that Palestine fulfills the conditions to be a full-fledged member of the UN. Madam President, Cuba once again calls for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in the illegally occupied Palestinian territories. We call for an end to violence and to warmongering. Humanitarian aid must be provided urgently in sufficient amounts for the Palestinian people. We must put an end to the forced displacement of the Palestinian people. They have a right to live there. We firmly condemn the killing of civilians, in particular women, children, and humanitarian workers from the UN system. The indiscriminate shelling against the people in Gaza and the destruction of housing, civilian infrastructure and hospitals, as well as the denial of basic services for the people, have further worsened the precarious humanitarian situation as a result of the blockade on the Gaza Strip and flagrantly violate international humanitarian law. Nothing can justify such actions. This is a collective punishment and is a war crime and crime against humanity. Those who are opposed for various pretexts to a ceasefire should bear the responsibility for the serious fallout. Every day, more innocent lives are lost. We must not remain indifferent. Cuba is not indifferent. We remain committed to the Palestinian cause, and Cuba will continue to contribute to the best of its ability to legitimate international efforts to put an end to these atrocities suffered by the sisterly Palestinian people. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cuba, and I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to express my deep thanks to you as you continue to facilitate this 10th emergency special session, which reflects our legitimate demands and reflects our visions to you and to the international community regarding the Palestinian question. We strongly regret that the Security Council failed to adopt a resolution allowing Palestine full membership at the United Nations. This exacerbates Israeli violations of international law, international humanitarian law. This continues unabated. It steers the Palestinian people away from their legitimate right and right to self-determination, which they have been calling for more than 75 years under the worst discriminatory and coercive measures. Mr. President, the international community insisted on ending Israeli violations against civilians in Gaza. These violations have claimed the lives of more than 32,000 people and injured 77,000 others. The international community and the public opinion globally supported the right of the Palestinian people to live in freedom and dignity. However, the Palestinian question is going through a critical phase. The legitimate right of the Palestinian people are being disregarded. The Israeli occupation power continue to commit their worst crimes before the eyes of the international community. We look forward to seeing the state of Palestine and its patient people becoming full members at the United Nations alongside other peace-loving nations and peoples. Granting full membership to Palestine at the United Nations will allow it to contribute effectively and comprehensively to the work of this international organization. It will allow it to promote international legitimacy. This is an important step to ensure stability in the region. Hindering the recognition of the right of the Palestinian people to establish their state is not in line with the historic and legal responsibility that the international community should shoulder towards ending the occupation. We need to ensure a final and just solution for the Palestinian question. Palestine and its people for long years have been going through conflict and suffering. The Palestinian people have the right to live in a prosperous and stable state which has a voice to add to international and regional relationships. Mr. President, we believe in justice and peace, and this is why we support the comprehensive and objective vision of the Palestinian question. We support the right of the Palestinian people. We strongly reject any hostile measures and policies against Palestinian people. It is important to make every effort to find a just, comprehensive solution to ensure a sustained ceasefire in Gaza, to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid and relief to civilians. We reject any attempt by Israel to end this Palestinian question. Once again, we support the diplomatic efforts to ensure that the State of Palestine joins the United Nations as a full member in line with the UN Charter. We support the Palestinian people and their decisions to achieve their aspirations and their right to self-determination, as well as to establish a free state on their land with Al-Quds al-Sharif as a capital. In conclusion, we express our full appreciation to member states that voted for the right of the Palestinian people in their quest to achieve justice, self-determination, and international recognition. Supporting this step is a legal and humanitarian duty. It reflects the global will to achieve justice and equity to ensure the legitimate right of the Palestinian people. It affirms that we are committed to justice and equality. In conclusion, we will continue to support the just Palestinian question in all international fora. We co-sponsored the resolution because we are fully aware that it is legitimate. We stress that we disassociate ourselves from some expressions and terms in the resolution because they do not go in line with Iraqi national legislations. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Iraq. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malta.
President, Excellencies, Malta voted in favor and welcomes the adoption of the resolution adopted last Friday. This is a positive and hopeful development that enhances the status and provides additional rights and privileges as outlined in the resolution to the observer state of Palestine. The General Assembly has spoken loudly and clearly. It has determined that Palestine qualifies for membership in the United Nations. It has similarly recommended that the Security Council reconsider this matter favorably. As an elected member of the Security Council, we will heed this message. Malta underscores that the two-state solution remains the only realistic foundation for sustainable peace and stability in the Middle East. Membership in the United Nations, together with discussions between the parties, is an important step in that regard. A vote in favor of this resolution is consistent with the political horizon that enjoys the support of the international community. President, the war in Gaza has raged on for 7 months. The atrocious terror attacks of 7th October must not be forgotten, and those responsible must be held accountable. We reiterate our call for the immediate and unconditional release of the hostages. We also unequivocally condemn Hamas's rocket attacks at civilian population centers. However, the subsequent Israeli-Hamas war in Gaza has decimated entire families and communities, killing over 34,000 people, the majority of whom are women and children, with thousands more wounded or missing. Equally concerning are the renewed fighting in the north of Gaza, the effective dismantling of the healthcare system, and the ever-looming threat of famine. Regretfully, the conflict is now expanding into Rafah, and this will have unimaginable and unbearable humanitarian consequences. Malta firmly rejects any such offensive. To address this continuously deteriorating situation and to provide the space for the necessary scale-up in the delivery of humanitarian aid, Malta reiterates its call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. We call for the immediate implementation of Security Council resolutions 2712, 2720 and 2728. And we reiterate that the provisional orders of the International Court of Justice on 26 January and 28 March must be complied with. Moreover, the calls for respect for international law, including international humanitarian law, by this Assembly cannot continue falling on deaf ears. On the humanitarian front, Israel must take all the necessary and effective measures to ensure, without delay, the unhindered provision at scale of basic services and humanitarian aid. We also stress the need for Rafah and Karim Shalom crossings to remain open and for their functionality to be expanded. All crossing points which can be used to deliver aid must be opened immediately. President, both parties must take the deal which is on the table. This will lead to the safe release of the hostages and the end to the carnage in Gaza. For the sake of Israelis and Palestinians alike, parties to the conflict must muster the political will to accept the ceasefire agreement. Only this will permit the necessary space for the advancement of a political horizon and the realization of a two-state solution along the pre-1967 borders, addressing the legitimate aspirations of both sides, with Jerusalem as the future capital of two states, living side by side in peace and security, in line with the relevant Security Council resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. I thank you.
The distinguished representative of Malta. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bangladesh.
Mr. President, I thank the President of the General Assembly for resumption of the plenary meeting of the 10th Emergency Special of the General Assembly. Bangladesh aligns itself with the statements delivered by Mauritania on behalf of the OIC Group and Uganda on behalf of non-aligned movement. Mr. President, once again, we are meeting in this August Assembly, where majority of the members of the United Nations have been reiterating their urge and demand to stop atrocities and genocide in Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territory by bringing an end to Israeli occupation and apartheid. This Assembly voted for immediate ceasefire. The Security Council passed resolution for immediate ceasefire, but we have been compelled to witness the Israeli atrocities continuing unabated at an unprecedented level of ferocity, resulting in increasing number of deaths of innocent Palestinians, of whom 70% are women and children. Mr. President, for decades, a member of the United Nations has been, in fact, allowed to commit genocide and atrocity crimes. For decades, breaches and violations of international law, including humanitarian and human rights law, continued. Countless resolutions of the United Nations failed to bring an end to the genocide and war crimes. Mounting failure to ensure inalienable rights of the Palestinians and to establish an independent, viable and sovereign state of Palestine has resulted in eroding trust in the United Nations, which we must reverse by doing the right thing, which is application of international law and international humanitarian law impartially and without any bias across the globe. Mr. President, it is the 76th year of Nakba, the historical injustice caused to the Palestinians. That happened just after the United Nations was established, with one of the objectives to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained. Unfortunately, we are still struggling in this august body to ensure the rightful place of the State of Palestine in this august Committee of Nations. In this context, the General Assembly adopted the historic resolution ES10/23 last Friday by a wide margin to grant new rights and privileges to Palestine and called on the Security Council to reconsider Palestine's request to become the 194th member of the United Nations. The vote indeed reflected the wide global support for full membership of Palestine in the United Nations, with an overwhelming majority of the countries expressed deep concern at the escalating death toll in Gaza and fears of an Israeli offensive in Rafah, where about 1.3 million Palestinians have sought refuge, which can bring once again widespread death and destruction, along with unspeakable misery for the Palestinians. We note with serious disappointment that the Council has been dysfunctional and paralyzed on repeated occasions on the issue of Palestinians' right for statehood. Today, once again, my delegation reiterates its steadfast position that Palestine's full membership in the United Nations may be instrumental in paving the way for a solution to the decades-long injustice and atrocities committed against the Palestinians. In the last seven months, more than 35,000 Palestinians have been killed, thousands injured. Thousands of bodies are buried under rubble, and despite efforts by the international community, there is no sign evident towards a solution. We all know how the initiatives for ceasefire has been jeopardized. We condemn the Israeli military attack in Rafah, where 1.5 million Palestinians have been sheltering, the majority in makeshift tents after fleeing from northern Gaza. The stubbornness of the occupying power by invading Rafah, irrespective of a truce deal, cannot be acceptable anyway. Before concluding, Mr. President, I thank all the member states who voted yes for the resolution AS/ES10/L30/Rev1. We now call upon the Security Council loudly and clearly to reconsider the UNGA's recommendation favorably in strict conformity with Article 4 of the Charter of the United Nations. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the distinguished representative of Bangladesh. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Peru.
Señor Presidente, los pesimistas.
Mr. President, pessimists say that it is pointless to call on reason when those who make the decisions want to be wrong. But drawing on a mystic from medieval times, we need to look at things with wisdom and resolve issues because of our calling for justice. The government of Peru reiterates its deep concern at the considerable worsening of the humanitarian situation in Gaza, where more than 1 million people, primarily women and children, have been displaced as they seek uncertain refuge. This situation has been further worsened by the recent military operations begun by Israel in the city of Rafah. Peru calls for the lifting of evacuation orders and is opposed to any forced displacement of the Palestinian civilian population because it runs counter to IHL. We understand that the international community, mankind, has called the members of the Security Council to comply faithfully with law and in good faith, and to act in accordance with the Charter and to take actions immediately to protect the civilian population. Mr. President, Peru firmly ratifies, renews, and confirms its rejection of the terrorist attacks by Hamas. We condemn them unequivocally. There is no excuse for them. My country is also concerned, shares the international concerns at the escalation of violence throughout the Middle East, with the risk of seriously impacting international peace and security. These disputes must be resolved through peaceful means. There is no other acceptable path, no other option. The right to self-defense must be carried out within the framework of respect for international law, including IHL, taking into account the principles of distinction and proportionality. The civilian population must not be affected in any way. Mr. President, the current situation requires us to recommit ourselves honestly to the principles of the UN Charter. Peace and security, human rights and development are interlinked pillars. As Amina Mohammed, DSG, has said, we cannot achieve sustainable development or protect human rights without the foundation of international law, when the foundation of international law may be torn asunder at any moment. Therefore, Peru reaffirms that the Security Council resolutions and the provisional measures of the ICJ, whose statute is an integral part of the Charter, are binding in nature, and therefore they should be complied with effectively, fully, and immediately. Only under and through peace and security can we speak about development. Only under the auspices of peace and security can we speak about a sustainable future. The current international circumstances means that the multilateral system must offer safeguards for proper functioning of our system without any loopholes. That must work for all peoples without distinction in all their diversity for present and future generations. We are firmly committed to multilateralism and firmly defend the UN system. Moreover, we must comply with the principles of the UN Charter, which we believe the system therefore cannot tolerate any violation of international humanitarian law. The patent inaction of the Security Council is compromising the future of the organization. Peru reiterates the need for an immediate ceasefire, the swift and unconditional release of all hostages, and guaranteeing of full, rapid, safe, and unfettered access for humanitarian aid to the civilian population in Gaza. Only in this way can we keep the situation in Gaza from becoming even more catastrophic. We are also committed to peace. This is consistent with our principled position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the government of Peru supports initiatives aimed at a long-term political solution with two states, Palestine and Israel. As in 1949, Peru voted in favor of Resolution 273, which admitted Israel as a member to the United Nations, and Peru supported the admission of Palestine when that country stepped before this body. Therefore, we urge the Security Council to positively reconsider the request for the admission of the Palestinian state as a full-fledged member to the United Nations. The resolution we adopted on Friday is a step in the right direction. Peru, therefore, co-sponsored it and voted in favor of it with full knowledge of the facts. May the words of all of us here in this great hall not fall on deaf ears. We must hear the voice of peace. Thank you.
Thank the distinguished representative of Peru. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, when Sierra Leone explained its position on the vote on the draft resolution S/2024/312 of the Security Council on April 18th, which would have recommended the granting of full membership status for the State of Palestine at the United Nations, we paraphrased Martin Luther King Jr. and stated that the State of Palestine's membership may have been delayed, as often in episodes of injustice. But as the arc of the moral universe may be long, but bends towards justice, Palestine's UN membership cannot be denied. The convening of the General Assembly on this issue lends credence to the bending of the arc of the moral universe towards justice. We therefore thank the President of the General Assembly for convening the 10th resumed emergency special session of the Assembly at the request of the chairs of the Arab Group, the Non-Aligned Movement, and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, pursuant to Resolution ES 10/22. Our debate is being held in the context of the ongoing hostilities in the Gaza Strip and the failure of the Security Council to recommend the admission of the State of Palestine as a member of the United Nations, owing to the non-concurring vote of one permanent member of the Council. The 12 members of the Security Council have voted in favor of the draft resolution, represented about 7.6 billion of the world's population. At this representative assembly, we take the opportunity to restate our position that we consider the State of Palestine's request for membership as legitimate, and we believe it could create a pathway to a political horizon founded on the principles of the two-state solution, based on the UN General Assembly and Security Council resolutions adopted on the question of Palestine, beginning with Resolution 181, which recommends an independent Jewish state and an independent Arab state, and in line with Article 4.1 of the United Nations Charter. The recognition of the State of Palestine by 143 member states and the Holy See over the years also speak to the legitimacy. We restate that our support for the application for UN membership is in line with the requirement of Article 4 of the UN Charter, the applicable rules of procedure both of the General Assembly and the Security Council, and the guidance provided by the International Court of Justice in its 28 May 1948 advisory opinion on the conditions of admission of a state to membership in the United Nations. As we also address this question in the context of the ongoing occupation of the State of Palestine, we are also of the view that at this stage of hostilities in the Gaza Strip, an engagement to resolve the three-quarters-of-a-century conflict and struggle for self-determination, it is important that the State of Palestine is able to engage on an equal level with its neighbor, the State of Israel, honoring the UN Charter principle of sovereign equality of states. Mr. President, in recognizing the provisions of Article 4.2 of the UN Charter and the failure of the Security Council to recommend the admission of the State of Palestine as a fully fledged member of the United Nations, we welcome the adoption of Resolution ES 10/23, outlining additional rights and privileges of participation of the State of Palestine, commencing during the 79th session of the General Assembly, without prejudice to its existing rights and privileges. Sri Lanka co-sponsored and accordingly voted in favor of the adopted resolution. We wish to particularly highlight operative paragraph 2 of the resolution that recommends that the Security Council reconsider the matter favorably. In our view, this would be in line with Article 10 of the UN Charter, which states, and I quote, "The General Assembly may discuss any questions or any matters within the scope of the present Charter and may make recommendations to the members of the United Nations or Security Council." End of quote. It is also in keeping with previous practice of the General Assembly. Mr. President, in addition to what the General Assembly has accomplished through the provisions of Resolution ES 10/23, more concerted efforts need to be made to achieve sustainable and lasting peace between Israel and Palestine, to address the plight of the Palestinian people, ensuring security and stability for the citizens of Israel and Palestine, end the occupation, and institute governance reforms that will strengthen the Palestine Authority's effectiveness and control over the Palestinian territory. On the ongoing hostilities in the Gaza Strip and other parts of occupied Palestinian territory, Sri Lanka should like to emphasize the following. Firstly, we are deeply concerned about reports of the commencement of military operations in Rafah, which is no longer a threat, but a reality backed by evacuation orders, closure of border crossings, and intensified bombings and incursions. We join the UN Secretary General in noting the human catastrophic consequences of any military operation in Rafah and calling on the parties to come to an agreement. Secondly, we continue to express our strong support for ongoing diplomatic efforts, and we're encouraged by the positive signs of progress in recent days for a negotiated deal that will lead to a ceasefire and exchange of hostages and prisoners. We urge the parties to the conflict to use this opportunity to engage in good faith to immediately halt the humanitarian catastrophe and for an agreement for a permanent ceasefire. Thirdly, we are appalled by the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. Already, the World Food Programme has indicated that unless there is an immediate, unfettered flow of humanitarian aid into the entire Gaza Strip, there will be full-blown famine in the north of Gaza with a spillover risk in the south. We therefore condemn attacks on UNRWA, including the reported arson attack on its East Jerusalem headquarters. Fourth and finally, we reiterate the call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and for the resolutions of the Security Council, particularly 2712, 2720, and 2728, and those of the General Assembly, to be fully respected by the parties and implemented, as well as the provisional measures ordered by the International Court of Justice. I thank you.
The distinguished representative of Sierra Leone. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Namibia.
Mr. President, my delegation aligns with the statement delivered by the Republic of Uganda on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement, and